She wasn't looking for him. She was just bending down to pick up an apple. But when their fingers touched in that subway car, in the dead of night in Manhattan, amidst the smell of sweat and the grinding of metal, Zoe Mercer's life officially ended. And another, more dangerous life began. He was Seojun Han, the heir to a criminal empire that silenced all of New York at the mention of his name. And he couldn't stop looking at her. If you're curious what happens when an invisible girl collides with a king of the underworld, watch until the end. Hit like, comment with the city you're watching in, so I know how far this story has progressed. And now, let's begin. The apple hit the floor at 11:47 p.m. It wasn't a dramatic sound, just a dull thud against grimy linoleum, one small bruised thing rolling away from Zoe Mercer's overstuffed canvas bag, bouncing between sneakers and boots, and the wheels of a stroller belonging to a woman who'd fallen asleep standing up. Nobody looked. In New York, nobody ever looked. That was the rule. You kept your eyes forward, your headphones in, your face arranged into the particular blankness that said, I am not here, I see nothing, I want nothing from you. Zoe had mastered that look 3 years ago, somewhere between her second eviction notice and the night she'd eaten crackers for 4 consecutive days because the bodega on her block had stopped accepting cards with insufficient funds. She bent down. Her back screamed at her. 16 hours on her feet, a catering shift at some hedge fund rooftop dinner in Midtown where the tablecloths cost more than her monthly rent, and the guests spoke to her the way people speak to furniture. She'd smiled through all of it. Smiled through the spilled Moet someone demanded she clean up immediately. Smiled through the senior partner who'd called her sweetheart 3 times and never once made eye contact. Smiled because smiling meant tips, and tips meant she could maybe buy herself something other than clearance produce this week. She reached for the apple. Someone else's hand was already there. It wasn't the hand that stopped her. It was the stillness. The complete, unnatural stillness radiating off the man crouched across from her like he'd been cut out of somewhere colder than this subway car and pasted here without apology. His fingers were long. A tattoo curled from beneath his cuff. Something intricate, something old. Black ink crawling up the back of his hand toward knuckles that had clearly, obviously, been broken more than once and healed wrong. Zoe looked up. She wished she hadn't. He was watching her the way she'd seen certain men watch exits, not with desire, not with threat, but with the focused attention of someone cataloging information. His face was angular and unreadable beneath the harsh LED lights of the R train. Dark eyes. The kind of jaw that made you think of someone who'd learned long ago not to clench it in public because people would notice. He was wearing a suit that probably cost more than her entire wardrobe combined, and he was sitting completely alone in a subway car that was, for a Friday night, unusually crowded, which meant people had moved away from him, which meant they'd moved away without being asked. Zoe registered all of this in about 2 seconds, which was 1.5 seconds longer than she should have spent registering anything about this man. She snatched the apple, straightened up, turned away. "You're bleeding," he said. His voice was low, not loud, not performative, just a fact delivered into the air between them like he had every right to notice things about her. Zoe looked down. The canvas bag strap had cut into her palm again. The broken buckle she'd been meaning to replace for 6 months had finally worn through the skin on her right hand. A thin line of red, nothing serious, but there it was. "I'm fine," she said, to the wall. He didn't respond. She didn't look back. The train lurched forward into the dark tunnel, and Zoe pressed herself against the pole near the doors and stared at the scratched reflection of herself in the window opposite. Dark circles, flour-dusted black pants, a strand of hair that had escaped her bun 5 hours ago, and she hadn't had the energy to fix. She looked exactly like what she was. A woman running on fumes and stubbornness in a city that rewarded neither. She didn't look at him again, but she felt him the whole ride to Atlantic Avenue. She forgot about it, or tried to. The problem with being invisible was that everything strange that happened to you felt like it must have happened to someone else. So Zoe filed the subway encounter in the same mental drawer she filed all inexplicable things, the drawer labeled "Not My Problem," and went home to her apartment on the 4th floor of a building in Flatbush that smelled permanently of someone else's cooking and the particular mildew that comes from windows that no longer seal properly. Her roommate Destiny was asleep on the couch. Her other roommate, a grad student named Pavel, who was supposedly only staying 3 weeks and had now been there 4 months, had left dishes in the sink again. Zoe ate half the apple standing at the counter in the dark, drank tap water, and fell into bed still wearing her work clothes. She slept for 5 hours because 5 hours was what she got. Then her alarm went off, and she did it again. The Harrington was the kind of restaurant that had a waiting list 8 months long, and a menu that changed every 6 weeks based on whatever the head chef had become obsessed with that season. It was also the kind of restaurant that employed people like Zoe as day shift prep servers, the ones who set up before service, restocked, and occasionally covered lunch when the regular staff called in sick, because she was good at being invisible and fast and not making mistakes that cost the restaurant its 3-star reputation. She'd been doing it for 14 months. She knew every server's coffee order and none of their last names. She knew which regular customers liked their water glasses filled before they asked and which ones got territorial about the breadbasket. She knew that the head server, a brittle woman named Caroline, had been passed over for management twice and took it out on whoever was nearest. Today, that was Zoe. Table 9 needs their amuse-bouche reset. You did it wrong. Zoe looked at Table 9. The amuse-bouche was perfectly aligned. She'd done it correctly. She knew she'd done it correctly because she always did it correctly, because she could not afford to do it incorrectly. I'll take another look, she said. Don't look. Fix it. Zoe went to Table 9. She moved each tiny spoon 2 millimeters to the left, which changed nothing, and came back. Done, she said. Caroline stared at her for a moment with the expression of someone deciding whether or not to press further, then moved on. Zoe let out a slow breath through her teeth and picked up the next task on her mental list. She was halfway through the lunch setup when the private dining reservation came in. Not unusual. The Harrington had a private room in the back. Mahogany walls, no windows, a table that seated 12, reserved for corporate events and the occasional high-end birthday. But this reservation came through the manager's direct line, which meant the manager personally appeared in the kitchen doorway, looking slightly pale, and announced that the evening shift was being restructured. Private event tonight, 30 people. Underground room is booked. The underground room. Zoe hadn't even known the restaurant had an underground room. Apparently, she found out over the next 4 hours it did. A separate space accessible through a door in the cellar, renovated sometime in the last decade, off the books in the sense that it didn't appear on any health inspection record and wasn't listed anywhere on the restaurant's official layout. The kind of room that existed because the right people had asked for it to exist. She was told she'd be serving there tonight alongside 2 other staff members. Marcus, who was built like a bouncer and had once calmly ejected a drunk customer using only 2 fingers, and Rosa, who had been at the Harrington for 11 years and reacted to the news of the underground room by crossing herself twice and saying nothing. Zoe was told there would be a different dress code. There was an envelope with her name on it containing a pressed white shirt, a black vest, and a note that said, "Eyes down. Do not speak unless spoken to. Do not react to anything you hear. There is a bonus of $300 at the end of the night." $300. That was 4 days of groceries, 2 months of the broken buckle on her bag getting fixed, a dent in the overdue electricity bill. She put on the shirt. The guests arrived in 1s and 2s starting at 8. Zoe stood near the back wall of the underground room with a tray of champagne flutes. Real crystal, heavy in a way that made your wrist ache after 20 minutes. And watched the space fill with people who moved through the world at a frequency she didn't recognize. Not the hedge fund loudness of last night's Midtown party. Not the see and be seen performance of upscale Manhattan dining. These people were quieter. The kind of quiet that comes not from politeness, but from knowing you don't need to perform for anyone in the room because everyone in the room already knows exactly what you are. She counted 7 languages in the first hour without trying. Korean, Mandarin, Italian, English, something she thought might be Russian, and 2 others she couldn't place. The men mostly wore dark suits. Some of the women wore more jewelry than Zoe had ever seen outside a museum. Everyone was impeccably groomed in the specific way of people who have never had to choose between a haircut and a bill payment. Marcus was stationed at the door. Rosa worked the other side of the room, and Zoe moved through them all like a ghost, refilling glasses, collecting empty plates, existing in the negative space of the event, the place where the staff lived, the place that rich and powerful people didn't register. She was carrying an empty tray back toward the service door when she saw him. Her body registered it before her brain did, a sudden stillness in her chest, the particular animal alertness that kicks in before conscious thought. She looked toward the far end of the room where a small group stood near the low bar, and there he was. Same suit, same stillness, the tattoos just visible above his collar, the man from the subway. He was talking to an older man who had the bearing of someone accustomed to being the most significant person in any room, and the cold, assessing eyes of someone who had maintained that position through methods Zoe didn't want to think about. Two men stood a careful distance behind him, not waitstaff, not guests, watching everything, watching her now. Zoe turned away, set the tray down, picked up a full one, eyes down. Do not react to anything you hear. She understood now why the note had been necessary. She made 3 more circuits of the room without looking at that corner again. On the 4th circuit, carrying a bottle of red she'd been instructed to top off for the main table, she heard a fragment of conversation she absolutely was not supposed to hear and would spend the next 72 hours trying to convince herself she hadn't. Consolidation by Q2 at the latest. Any family not aligned by then forfeits their territory to the collective. No exceptions. And Han? He agrees to these terms? A pause. Then a voice she recognized even though she'd only heard it once, quiet and precise as a key turning in a lock. I set the terms. She poured the wine without spilling it, set the bottle down, walked back to the service corridor with her face completely neutral and her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her fingertips. Han. She spent the rest of the night pretending she was someone who hadn't heard that. She was paid at the end of the night in cash by a man she'd never seen before who came through the same unremarkable door she'd entered through and handed her a small envelope without speaking. The 300 was there. She counted it in the bathroom before leaving, old habit, because she'd been underpaid twice in the last year and she'd learned not to trust envelopes. The money was correct. She walked out through the kitchen, through the back exit, and onto the street where the city was doing its usual late-night decompress. The taxis, the delivery bikes, the people spilling out of bars into the cold air. She pulled her coat tighter and started walking toward the subway. She noticed the car after about half a block. Black. Expensive. Parked across from the restaurant's back entrance with its engine off and its windows darkened. Probably nothing. This was Manhattan. Expensive cars sat everywhere. She kept walking. It followed her. Not aggressively, not quickly, just maintaining a distance of about 30 feet, which was exactly far enough to be deniable and close enough to be impossible to miss if you were paying attention. And Zoe, 4 years of walking home from late shifts in this city, was always paying attention. She turned left on a whim. The car turned left. She crossed to the opposite side of the street. The car crossed. She stopped at a food cart, pretending to look at the menu written on steam-fogged plexiglass, and watched the car's reflection. It stopped. Her phone was at 11% battery. Her pepper spray was in the broken bag. The nearest subway entrance was 60 feet ahead. She walked directly to it, went through the turnstile, and stood on the platform with her back against the wall until the train came. She didn't see the car again. She didn't see anyone come down the stairs behind her. By the time the train pulled into Flatbush, she'd almost talked herself into believing she'd imagined the whole thing. Almost. The orchids arrived 3 days later. White. 12 of them, in a matte black vase, sitting on the landing outside her apartment door when she came home from a Tuesday morning shift. No card, no note, no name. She brought them inside because she didn't know what else to do with them, and because they were the most beautiful things anyone had ever left outside her door, which made her angrier than it should have. "Those are expensive," Destiny said from the couch. "I know. Someone like you?" "Nobody likes me," Zoe said, and went to her room. She put them on the windowsill. She told herself she'd throw them out tomorrow. She didn't throw them out tomorrow. The second delivery was a week after the first. A different kind of orchid. Paler, almost translucent, with a fragrance that was lighter and stranger than anything she could name. Still no card. Still on the landing when she came home. This time Pavel was in the kitchen when she brought them in, and he looked at them with the expression of a man who had watched too many thriller films. "You should probably be concerned," he said. "Thank you, Pavel." "Seriously, Zoe." "I said thank you." She went to her room. She set the second vase next to the first. She sat on the edge of her bed in her work clothes and looked at both of them for a long time. She wasn't scared. She wasn't sure that was a good thing. Topen. She saw Seojun Han for the third time on a Friday morning, on the same R train, heading in the opposite direction. She recognized him before she consciously registered him. That thing happened again, the stillness in her chest, her body making decisions ahead of her brain. He was across the car, standing this time, one hand on the overhead bar, reading something on his phone. No bodyguards, or none that she could see, which she was beginning to understand were two different things. He didn't appear to notice her. She watched him for a moment, the way he stood, weight balance, slightly forward, like someone who never fully rested. The faint shadow under his jaw where he'd shaved a day ago and not since. One of the tattoos on his right hand was partially obscured by the cuff of what was today, inexplicably, a gray sweater. Expensive still, but still. A gray sweater. He looked almost like a person. She looked away. At 34th Street, she felt rather than saw him shift. When she glanced back, he was looking directly at her with an expression she couldn't read, the kind of face that had been trained into stillness so thoroughly that something showing through it felt like a crack in a wall. She met his eyes. Didn't look away first. It cost her something. He crossed the car. The train was crowded enough that this required actual movement through people, not just a few steps. He came to stand beside her. Not too close, not pressing, but close enough that she could hear him over the train noise when he spoke. "You were at the Harrington," he said. Not a question. "You were on my subway," she said. Before that. Something shifted in his face. Not surprise, more like confirmation of something he'd already suspected. "You're not scared," he said. "You don't know what I am." He was quiet for a moment. The train swayed. Someone nearby was eating something that smelled strongly of garlic. A child 2 seats away was conducting an argument with a stuffed rabbit. The entire mundane chaos of the city crammed into one lurching metal tube, and this man standing next to her like he'd stepped out of a different kind of story altogether. "The orchids," he said. "They were an apology." "For what?" "The car. I had you followed. I wanted to make sure you got home." Zoe turned to look at him fully. He was already looking at her, not the way men usually looked at her, not assessing her appearance or her utility, but the way she'd caught him looking at the exit of that room. Like he was cataloging information, like she was something he hadn't been able to categorize, and that was bothering him. "You had me followed," she said, "and then you sent flowers as an apology." "Yes. That is not how apologies work." "I know," he said. And then, after a pause that felt like it cost him something too, "I'm still learning." The train announced her stop. She picked up her bag. She had 6 things she wanted to say and settled on none of them. "Don't follow me again," she said, and got off the train. She walked to the stairs without looking back. At the top of the stairs she stopped, pressed against the filthy tile wall, and let out a breath she'd been holding for 4 subway stops. Her hands were shaking. She told herself it was anger. Uoromoch. She went back to the Harrington on Monday. Not because anything had drawn her there, but because it was her scheduled shift and she needed the money. She changed her route to work 3 times in 4 days. Different trains, different streets, different timing. No cars followed her. No more orchids appeared. She started to think maybe that was the end of it. Then Caroline pulled her aside before the lunch rush with an expression that contained something Zoe had never seen there before. Uncertainty. "Someone called in a special request this morning," Caroline said, "through the private line." Zoe waited. "They specifically requested you for a private lunch service, just 1 table, 12 o'clock, underground room again." The fluorescent light in the prep kitchen hummed. Somewhere behind them someone dropped a sheet pan and swore. "I have a regular shift," Zoe said. "It pays $400 for 2 hours." Caroline said it the way people say the number on a losing lottery ticket, baffled by the size of it. "Cash." $400. Zoe thought about the electricity bill, about the bag buckle, about the 4 bruised apples. "Who made the request?" she asked, though she already knew. Caroline looked at her with the cautious expression of someone who has just realized they're standing at the edge of something they don't want to fall into. "The name on the booking," she said carefully, "was Han." The prep kitchen kept humming. Someone in the back was chopping something with the fast mechanical rhythm of a person who'd done it 10,000 times. The smell of stock and butter and the bottom of a commercial pan warming too fast filled the air. Zoe looked at her sneakers. Left one was coming apart at the toe. She'd been duct taping the inside for 3 weeks, and the tape was starting to fail. She thought, this is where you say no. This is the moment where a sensible person says no and walks out and gets on with the invisible ordinary disaster of her ordinary life. She thought about the orchids on her windowsill, both vases, the way they'd caught the morning light. I'm still learning, he'd said, like it was a wound. What time did you say? She asked. Caroline looked at her for another long moment, then quietly, 12 o'clock. Zoe picked up her apron. I'll be there, she said. But she told herself she was going for the money. She repeated it on the train, under her breath like a thing that needed reinforcing. $400. 2 hours. She'd keep her eyes down, pour the water, collect the payment, and leave. Clean transaction, nothing else. The underground room was set for one when she arrived at 11:45. One table dressed in white linen, 2 place settings, a low arrangement of pale flowers she didn't recognize in the center. Rosa was nowhere. Marcus was nowhere. Just Zoe and a room that smelled of beeswax and old stone. Seojun arrived at noon exactly. No bodyguards, or none that she could see, which she had now firmly decided meant they're close but invisible, because she was learning his logic. He sat down. He looked at her. She filled his water glass. Sit down, he said. She set the water pitcher on the table. I'm working. I booked both seats. She looked at the second place setting. She looked at him. His expression was the same as always, so not cold exactly, but controlled in the way of someone who had spent a long time building walls and was now, apparently, sitting in a room he'd constructed specifically to have a conversation. That's, she said, not how this works. I'm aware. He gestured at the chair. Please. She sat because she was tired and her feet hurt, and also, and this she would not admit to anyone, including herself, for a long time, because she wanted to. She sat across from him in the white linen underground room, and he looked at her across the pale flowers and said, without preamble, You heard something at the last event. I'd like to know what you're going to do with it. Nothing, she said immediately. People who say nothing immediately usually mean I haven't decided yet. I mean nothing. I heard a sentence. I don't know what it meant. I don't want to know what it meant. I'm a waitress. I go home after every shift and I eat clearance produce and I watch my roommate argue with Pavel about the dishes, and none of what happens in rooms like this one has anything to do with my life. He was quiet, looking at her. She held it. You're not frightened of me, he said again. Not a question this time either. Something else. Something that sounded underneath the flatness of his voice almost like confusion. I'm scared of my electricity being shut off, she said. I'm scared of my landlord deciding my lease isn't worth renewing. I'm scared of getting injured and not having enough sick leave to cover it. She held her hands flat on the white linen. You're just a man in a nice suit. There's a hierarchy of what scares me, and you're not at the top. Something happened to his face then that she almost missed. A very brief, very contained thing, there and gone, like a door opening an inch and then pulled shut. What would you do, he said slowly, if you weren't scared of anything? She laughed before she could stop herself. It was a short, slightly broken sound. I have no idea. I've always been scared of something. He looked at her like she'd said something important, like she'd accidentally translated a text he'd been struggling with. Me too, he said, quietly, like it cost him. The food arrived, brought by someone she didn't see, materializing from a door she hadn't noticed. It was extraordinary. She ate because she was hungry, and it was extraordinary, and she'd already made every bad decision available to her by sitting down. He ate too. They talked, in the careful, stilted way of two people who didn't know how to talk to each other yet and were both aware of it. He didn't explain himself. He didn't explain the orchids or the car, or why he'd booked this room. She didn't ask. Neither of them pretended this was a normal lunch. By the time she stood to leave, an hour later, something had shifted between them in a way she couldn't precisely name, like the static pressure before weather changes, like something in the air rearranging itself. The money's in the envelope by the door, he said. I put extra in, for the bag. She stopped with her hand on the back of her chair. How do you know about my bag? You were favoring your right hand on the subway, he said. The strap cuts you. She turned around. He was still sitting at the table, looking at her with that cataloging attention, that crack-in-the-wall expression. "You notice too much," she said. "I know," he said. "It's a problem." She left. In the envelope by the door was $800 and a plain white card with a phone number and 2 words, "just in case." She didn't call. For 9 days, she did not call. She put the card in the back of her phone case and paid the electricity bill and bought real groceries and got the bag strap fixed by the cobbler on Flatbush Avenue, who charged her $12, and looked at the state of the buckle with the expression of a doctor examining a patient who has waited far too long. On the 10th day, she came home to find her door unlocked. She hadn't left it unlocked. She never left it unlocked. She stood in the hallway, grocery bag in her arms, and looked at the thin gap between the door and the frame. Destiny was at work. Pavel had gone to visit family. The building super had stopped responding to her maintenance requests 4 months ago and would absolutely not be entering her apartment to fix something. Her phone was in her pocket, 11% battery. She could call the police. She could walk to the neighbor's apartment and knock. She could turn around and leave and call from the street. She stood there long enough for the frozen peas in her grocery bag to start to soften. Then she took out the card from behind her phone case. He answered on the second ring. "Someone's been in my apartment," she said. No hello, no preamble. A pause on his end. Not surprise. Something else. Calculation. "Don't go in," he said. "I'm in the hallway." "Stay there. Don't touch the door." Another pause, shorter. "I'm 20 minutes away." "You can't just," she started. 20 minutes, Zoe." She stood in the hallway with her softening peas and her 11% phone battery, and the particular cold dread of realizing that whatever she'd walked into on that subway platform 3 weeks ago, she was not walking out of it the easy way. 17 minutes later, she heard footsteps on the stairs. Not one person. Several. And for the first time since this started, truly, properly, for the first time, Zoe Mercer was afraid. Not of him. Of what came with him. Of what it meant that he'd arrived in 17 minutes. Of what it meant that somewhere, in the gap between a bruised apple and an unlocked door, she had become someone who mattered in a world she'd never wanted to enter. The footsteps reached the landing. She pressed her back against the wall, and Seojun Han came around the corner with his sleeves rolled up and his eyes already scanning the hallway before he even saw her. And she saw the thing she'd been half expecting and half dreading since the first night on the train. That underneath all the stillness and the control and the careful, constructed distance, there was something urgent in him, something raw. He looked at her standing there with her grocery bag and her fear, and something crossed his face so fast she almost didn't catch it. Almost. "You're okay," he said. Not a question. "I'm okay," she said. Her voice was steadier than she'd expected. He turned to the man behind him, large, silent, familiar from the underground room, and said something in Korean. The man went to her door. Seojun turned back to her. "This wasn't random," he said. Her stomach dropped. "What does that mean?" He looked at her for a long moment, measuring, the kind of look that precedes a decision being made, a line being crossed, a door being opened or closed. "It means," he said quietly, "that someone knows you matter to me." The hallway was very still. "I don't matter to you," she said. "You don't know me." "No," he said, and then, very carefully, "But someone thinks I do." The man came back from the door and said something brief. Seojun's jaw tightened, just barely, just enough. "What?" Zoe said. "What did he say?" Seojun looked at her. In the harsh fluorescent light of the Flatbush hallway, with the softening peas and the broken door and the city grinding on outside, she watched him decide something. "He found a camera," he said. "Inside, above the window." The grocery bag slipped from her fingers. He caught it. Yeah. The grocery bag hit the floor before he caught it, and Zoe heard the eggs crack. She stood in the hallway of her own apartment building and listened to the sound of something breaking inside the bag. A soft, wet collapse, and thought, very clearly, that's the eggs. She thought it because thinking about the eggs meant not thinking about the camera. The camera above the window, inside her apartment, the place she slept with the curtains that didn't fully close, and the habit she had of changing in the corner by the closet where she thought, where she'd always assumed nobody could see. Hey! Seojun's voice was close. She hadn't noticed him step toward her. Look at me. She looked at him. Breathe, he said. I'm breathing. You're not. She breathed. It came out ragged and too short. The man behind Seojun, broad-shouldered, face like a closed door, she'd learn later his name was Kang, was still in her doorway with his phone out, taking photographs of something she couldn't see from the hallway. Another man she hadn't even noticed arriving had gone past them both and was on the stairs now, checking the floor below. How long? She said. Her voice came out flat. That happened sometimes when she was scared, like the fear pressed everything else out and left only the words. How long has it been there? We don't know yet. Best guess, Seojun looked at her steadily. Kang will be able to tell from the dust accumulation around the mount. An hour, a week, a month. He'll know within range. Within range, she repeated. Great. That's a very comforting answer. It wasn't meant to be comforting. She pressed the back of her hand against her mouth, not to stop herself from speaking, to stop herself from saying something she'd regret, which was different. She'd learned that distinction somewhere around age 16, growing up in a house where what you said in anger could be used against you for years. My roommate, she said. Destiny. She's been here every day. I know. She looked at him sharply. You know. A beat. I know she works a morning shift at the hospital on 7th. She leaves at 6:15 and gets back around 4. You work evenings most days. The apartment has been empty a significant portion of every afternoon. The silence stretched. In the apartment, Kang was moving carefully, his footsteps controlled and deliberate, the sound of a man who had done this kind of thing before and understood what contaminating a scene meant. You've been watching my building, Zoe said. Yes. For how long? He didn't answer immediately, not evasion, the pause of a man measuring exactly how much honesty the moment could hold. Since the night of the Harrington event, he said. That was 3.5 weeks ago. She picked up the grocery bag from where he'd set it against the wall. The eggs were definitely gone. She could feel the wet weight of them through the canvas. She set the bag back down because she didn't know what else to do with her hands. You need to explain something to me, she said. Right now, not in a restaurant, not over food. Here. Why does someone think I matter to you? Because I served you champagne and sat across a table from you twice. Seojun was quiet for a moment. The fluorescent bulb above them buzzed. It had always buzzed. She'd reported it 3 times to the super. The super hadn't fixed it, and now she would hear it forever in her memory as the sound of this specific moment. The buzz of a dying light in a hallway where everything changed. There are people, he said slowly, who pay very close attention to what I do, who I speak to, who I look at. He paused. I have not been careful enough. Not careful enough, she said. That's what I am. A lapse in your operational security. Something moved in his face. That's not... Then what is it? Her voice came out sharper than she'd intended. Good. Sharp was better than scared. Because from where I'm standing, Seojun, a man I've talked to twice had someone put a camera in my apartment, and you're telling me it's because you weren't careful. So either someone is using me to get to you, which means I'm in danger because of your choices, or you put that camera there, which means I'm in danger because of your choices. Either way, I didn't put the camera there. I know. She said it before she thought it, and then had to sit with the fact that she'd said it. I know you didn't. That's not the point. Kang appeared in the doorway. He spoke to Seojun in Korean, a brief, clipped exchange, the kind between 2 people who have worked together long enough to have compressed their communication down to essentials. Seojun's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes did. What? Zoe said. The mount is recent. 2, maybe 3 days. Seojun looked at her. It's not one of mine. The make is Eastern European, a manufacturer used primarily by the Volkov network. The name meant nothing to her. That was fine. The fact that it clearly meant something to him meant enough. So, someone from a different organization, she said. A competitor, yes. And they put a camera in my apartment because they think you care about me. Yes. She looked at the doorway to her apartment. Past Kang's shoulders, she could see the edge of her kitchen counter, the second orchid vase still on the windowsill. She'd brought a 3rd one inside last week without fully acknowledging why. I have to call Destiny, she said. Yes. She can't come back here tonight. No. She looked at him. And me? He held her gaze. You can't stay here either. She laughed. It was a short, ugly sound. Right. Of course not. She pushed off the wall. I'll go to a hotel. Zoe, I have money now. I can afford a hotel. I'll go somewhere they won't know where, and this whole thing will... They already know your face. His voice was quiet, not loud. It didn't need to be loud. They've had a camera on you for 3 days. They know your schedule, your habits, what you buy at the grocery store. A hotel you choose on your own is not safe. She stopped. The hallway was very still. Then where? She said. He didn't answer right away. She watched him have a conversation with himself behind his eyes, the particular silence of a man weighing a decision he's been moving toward for weeks and doesn't entirely want to reach. I have a place, he said. On the Upper East Side. It's not my primary residence. It's clean. Nobody knows it. Kang and one other will be outside. She stared at him. You're asking me to move into one of your properties. Temporarily. That is insane. Yes, I'm not going to do that. I understand. She stood there. He stood there. Between them, 3 weeks of orchids and subway trains, and a lunch in an underground room and a card that said just in case, and now a camera above her window and broken eggs, and the knowledge, settling into her bones like cold water, that the invisible life she'd constructed with so much careful, grinding effort had been seen, was being seen, had been seen for days. I want to be very clear about something, she said. If I go with you tonight, it's because I'm making a practical decision about my own safety, not because of anything else. I know, he said. I don't owe you anything. You don't. And when whatever this is gets resolved, I go back to my life. Something crossed his face. Quick. Gone. Yes, he said. She picked up the grocery bag. I need 20 minutes to pack. The apartment on the Upper East Side was not what she'd expected. She'd expected cold, glass and steel, and the kind of curated minimalism that announced wealth by removing all evidence of living in it. What she got instead was an ordinary-sized apartment on the 6th floor of a pre-war building. High ceilings, wooden floors that creaked in 2 specific spots, a kitchen that smelled faintly of coffee, even though the machine was clean, books on the shelves, not decorative books arranged by color for an interior designer's photograph, actual books, red books, spines cracked and pages bent. One of them was a Korean translation of a novel she'd read in college. She didn't ask about it. Kang did a sweep of the apartment in 4 minutes and left without speaking to her. Seojun showed her the bedroom, the bathroom, the locks on every window, and the location of a second phone, a burner, fully charged, in the kitchen drawer. Then he stood in the hallway with his hands in his pockets and looked like a man standing outside a room he'd built for someone else. I'll be back in the morning, he said. Where are you going? To deal with the camera and whoever placed it. She leaned against the doorframe. And how do you deal with that? His expression was the same, controlled, level. Carefully, he said. She looked at him. He looked back. Are you going to hurt someone? She asked. A pause. Honest, at least. Probably. She didn't know what to do with that. She'd known what he was from the moment she'd heard his voice in that underground room. I set the terms. She'd had 3 weeks to build a clean, sensible wall between the man who'd sent her orchids and the man who controlled whatever empire required terms to be set. The wall had always been thin. Now she was standing inside his apartment in the dark and she could feel the wall getting thinner. Is it going to help? She said. Hurting them. It sends a message. To who? To everyone paying attention. She was quiet. In the street below, a car alarm went off and stopped, the city doing its usual thing, indifferent. The message being, she said, don't touch things that belong to me. His jaw tightened, just slightly, the message being that there are consequences for touching your things. Zoe, I'm not your thing. I know that. Clipped, like it had cost him something to say, she straightened up. Then make sure the message is about the camera, not about me. He looked at her for a long moment. Something complicated moved through his expression. Frustration, she thought, and underneath it something less comfortable. Something that might have been, in another man, in another life, closer to respect. "Get some sleep," he said. He left. She sat on the edge of the unfamiliar bed in the Upper East Side apartment and called Destiny, who was furious and frightened, and finally, after 20 minutes, agreed to stay with her cousin in the Bronx. Then Zoe lay down in her clothes and stared at the ceiling and did not sleep for a long time. In the morning, he came back smelling of cigarette smoke and cold air and something she chose not to identify. She was already up, had already found coffee, had already stood at the window watching the street below in the gray early light. He came through the door with Kang behind him and stopped when he saw her standing in the kitchen, and there was a moment, very brief, where his face did something unguarded before he put it back where it belonged. "Problem's been addressed," he said. "Which problem?" "The camera, the operative who placed it." He poured himself coffee without being invited, which irritated her and also, she noted, did not feel like an intrusion. "There are 6 other operatives we've identified who've been tracking you." 6. "The Volkov network is thorough." She set her mug down. "Why? Why am I worth 6 operatives?" He sat at the kitchen table, didn't ask, just sat, with the ease of a man who had long ago stopped needing permission for things. "Because 3 weeks ago, at the underground event, I broke protocol. I crossed the room to speak to you on the subway the following week, and then I booked a private lunch." He looked at her. "In my world, those are significant actions. People noticed. So this is your fault." "Yes." "You said that very easily." "Because it's true." His voice was flat, not defensive, the tone of a man who had a precise, unsentimental relationship with accountability. "I made choices that put you in a visible position. I should have been more controlled." She sat across from him. "More controlled? You mean you should have stayed away?" "Yes." "Then why didn't you?" He wrapped both hands around the mug. Outside, a garbage truck was working its way down the block. The rhythmic crash and grind of it loud through the old windows. He was quiet for long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. "I don't know," he said. And then quieter, "That's not something I say often." She believed him. That was the irritating part. "Tell me about Volkov," she said. He looked at her. "Why?" "Because 6 operatives were watching me for 3 days, and I'd like to know who I'm dealing with." "You're not dealing with them. I am." "Seojun." She said his name flat and direct. "Someone had a camera in my apartment. I'm already dealing with them, whether I choose to or not. So tell me." A pause. He assessed her the way she'd seen him assess rooms, quickly, thoroughly, deciding what was load-bearing and what wasn't. Dmitry Volkov runs the Northeastern distribution network for 3 criminal families out of Brighton Beach, he said. "We've been in a territorial dispute over the port operations for 14 months. He's been looking for leverage. And I'm leverage. You could be, if he believed I cared enough." He looked at her steadily. "Which is why I need you to understand. If you stay visible, if you continue to be someone I'm seen with, the risk doesn't decrease." She held his gaze. "Is that you telling me to disappear?" "It's me telling you the truth." The truth and the recommendation aren't the same thing. Something shifted in his face. "No," he said, "they're not." She thought about this. She thought about Destiny at her cousin's in the Bronx, and Pavel, who didn't even know anything had happened, and the cobbler on Flatbush who'd fixed her bag strap for $12. She thought about the life she'd built. Invisible, grinding, genuinely hers, and the camera above the window that had been watching it for 3 days. "I want to go back to my apartment," she said. "I want to know it's clean and safe, and I want to go back. I can arrange that. I want to go back to my life." A pause. Quieter. "I know. But," he looked at her. "But someone already decided I'm important to you," she said, "which means it doesn't matter what I want. It matters what they believe." She picked up her coffee. "So what do we do about what they believe?" He was still. Looking at her with the full weight of that attention, the attention she'd felt on the subway and across the table of the underground room and in the fluorescent hallway of her building. The kind of attention that she was learning he gave to very few things, very few people. "Most people in your position," he said slowly, "would want distance, would want me gone from their life. I'm not most people. No, he said. You're not. Something in his voice changed, not soft. He didn't do soft, or hadn't yet, but the controlled surface of it cracked, fractionally. That's been the problem from the beginning. She went back to her apartment 2 days later after Kang and his team had swept it clean and installed their own security on the door and the windows. It felt different, not dirty. Everything was exactly as she'd left it, which was somehow worse, the ordinariness of it now contaminated by knowledge. She moved the orchid vases to the kitchen counter and told herself she'd throw them out soon. She didn't throw them out. She went back to work. She went back to the R train and the Harrington and the routine of her life, because stopping would mean admitting the routine had been permanently altered. Caroline was tight-mouthed and curious in the way of someone who had noticed the private lunch and the private line and drawn conclusions she wasn't brave enough to voice. Zoe gave her nothing to work with. Seojun texted twice in the first week. Practical things. Confirmations that the security held, a notification about a credible threat to her building that turned out to be nothing, a brief message at 11 p.m. on a Thursday that just said, "Are you eating?" She stared at that one for a while. "Yes," she wrote back. A pause. Then, "Real food or the apples?" She looked at the apple on her counter. "Apples are real food," she wrote. "I'll send something." "Don't," she started. He sent a bag of groceries via a car service that arrived 20 minutes later. Real groceries. Good ones. She stood at the counter for 5 minutes, deciding whether to be furious about it, and then ate the cheese with crackers standing up because she was hungry and she was not going to pretend otherwise. She didn't say thank you. She told herself this was a boundary. She texted, "You're going to create a habit I can't afford." He replied, "Or teach you what you should have been eating all along." That's condescending. Yes. Then, "Sorry." She stared at the word. In her experience, powerful men did not apologize for small things. They didn't notice small things. The smallness of the thing made the apology stranger and more real than any large gesture would have been. She put her phone down and went to bed and did not think about it. She met Una Park on an October afternoon outside a coffee shop on 68th Street. She didn't know who Una was. That was important. She had no idea, no warning, no context. She just saw a woman sitting at the outdoor table as she walked past, beautiful in the specific architectural way of someone who has spent a lot of time making beauty a tool, and the woman looked up and said, "Zoe Mercer." Zoe stopped. "I think you have me confused with someone," she said, though she knew immediately, with the cold instinct of someone who had recently learned to read situations faster, that this was not a confusion. "I don't." The woman's English was flawless, accented lightly with something that might have been Korean, or might have been the accent of someone educated in multiple languages and shaded by all of them. She was wearing a coat that probably cost 3 months of Zoe's salary, and she sat with the stillness of someone trained to never look uncomfortable in any space. "Please sit down. I'd like to talk to you." "I'd rather not." "I know." A brief controlled smile. "Sit down anyway." Zoe sat down. Because something in her recognized, with the same animal instinct that had registered Seojun on the subway, that standing in the street was worse than sitting here. "My name is Una Park," the woman said. "My family and Seojun Han's family have had a formal arrangement for 6 years. Are you aware of this?" "No," Zoe said. Una looked at her with the particular attention of someone deciding whether she was lying or genuinely ignorant. Whatever she concluded, she continued. "It's a business arrangement primarily, structural, the kind of arrangement that keeps 2 organizations from destroying each other over territory." She smoothed an invisible wrinkle from the sleeve of her coat. "It has been destabilized." "By what?" "By you," said without heat, stated as fact. Zoe held it. "I've had 2 conversations with him." "You've had considerably more than 2 conversations with him, and more relevantly, you've had his attention, which is something very few people have ever had." Una looked at her with an expression that wasn't quite anger, something cooler than anger. "He refused a meeting with my father last month, the first refusal in 6 years. He restructured 2 partnership terms that had been agreed upon at the Harrington event. He sent his security chief to remove a surveillance device placed by a third party rather than treating it as the negotiating move it was clearly intended to be. She paused. He is making emotional decisions. For him, that is very dangerous. Zoe was quiet. I'm not telling you this to threaten you, Yuna said. It sounds like a threat. It's information. She reached into her bag. Zoe's body tensed, every alarm going off, and placed a small envelope on the table between them. That is enough money to leave New York, to start over somewhere he won't follow you. The number in the envelope is a contact at a relocation service I've used before. Clean, professional, effective. Zoe looked at the envelope. She didn't touch it. You're asking me to disappear, she said. I'm asking you to be sensible. A pause. You're an intelligent woman, Ms. Mercer. You understand what happens to people who stand in the middle of arrangements they don't understand. You understand what happens to leverage. She looked at Zoe steadily. Right now, you are not leverage. You are a distraction. I'd like to keep it that way by resolving this quietly. The October air was cold and thin. At the next table, a man was reading a newspaper with his collar up. From inside the coffee shop came the ordinary noise of an espresso machine and someone laughing at something on their phone. Zoe looked at the envelope. She thought about 6 operatives watching her apartment, about the camera above the window, about Destiny in the Bronx and Pavel's worried face, and the bag strap that finally worked, and the apples on her counter she hadn't replaced yet because Seojun had sent cheese and crackers, and she'd been eating those instead. She thought about a gray sweater, about I'm still learning, about a man falling asleep in a subway car who hadn't known what to do with the knowledge that he was tired. No, she said. Yuna didn't react. She'd expected it, maybe, or she didn't react to things. Ms. Mercer, keep your envelope. Zoe pushed it back across the table. And tell your contact at the relocation service I don't need their number. Yuna looked at her for a long moment. The controlled beauty of her face didn't change. But something behind it did. Something that moved from assessment to something else. Something Zoe couldn't quite name and didn't want to sit with. You don't know what you're saying no to, Yuna said quietly. You think this is about him choosing you. It isn't. It's about 2 families and 6 years and $100 million in mutual interest, and the fact that he is running an empire on the edge of collapse because he's not sleeping and he's not thinking and he's letting a woman from Brooklyn who works for tips distract him from, I know what I'm saying no to, Zoe said. I'm saying no to you. She stood up. Her heart was going at twice its normal rate. Her hands were completely still. Walk away from him, Yuna said. One more time. Quietly. Almost something that could have been genuine. Zoe looked at her. Tell me something, she said. 6 years of formal arrangement. Does he know you like him, or does he just know you're useful to each other? Yuna's face went very still. Zoe walked away. She made it to the end of the block before her legs started shaking. She called Seojun from the next corner. He answered in one ring. There's a woman named Yuna Park, she said. A beat. A very charged beat. Where are you? He said. 68th Street. She just offered me money to leave New York. Silence. Not the calculating silence she'd heard from him before. Something different. Something tighter and less controlled. Are you hurt? He said. I'm fine. It was a conversation. She was civil. Zoe pressed her back against the building behind her. The shaking was moving up through her hands now. But I need you to explain to me what a formal arrangement means. I need you to tell me who she is to you, right now, on the phone. The pause stretched. Zoe. Right now, Seojun. Another pause. She heard him breathe. She heard him make a decision. She's someone I was expected to marry, he said. Before. The street went very quiet around her. Before what? She said. He didn't answer immediately. And in the space where the answer should have been, Zoe felt something shift, the way you feel a floor shift before you understand it's going to give way, the second before the fall, when your body knows and your mind is still catching up. Before the subway, he said. Before the apple. The shaking in her hands moved all the way to her chest. She's going to come back, Zoe said. Not a question. Yes. And next time it won't be an envelope. His voice was very quiet. No. Next time it won't. She closed her eyes, opened them, The city moved around her, the usual relentless, indifferent motion of it, and she stood in the middle of it with the knowledge that she had just turned down the last clean exit she was likely to be offered. "Okay," she said. "Okay, what?" "Okay. Okay, I need you to tell me everything. Not the edited version, not the version where you decide what I can handle." Her voice was steadier now. Anger was doing its job again. "Everything, because whoever comes through that door next time, I'm not walking in blind." A pause. "That conversation," he said slowly, "is going to change things." "Things are already changed," she said. "The camera changed them. Unipark changed them." She watched a cab cut off a delivery bike, and the biker shout something she couldn't hear over the traffic. "I can't unknow any of this, Seojun. So either you tell me what I'm in the middle of, or I go back to my apartment and figure it out." She waited 3 seconds for him to answer. He didn't. "I'm coming to you," he said instead. "Don't go back to the apartment. Don't go anywhere crowded. Find somewhere with your back to a wall and stay there. Seojun, 15 minutes. His voice had changed. Not louder, tighter. The voice of a man who had just reclassified a situation and was moving accordingly. "I mean it, Zoe. Somewhere with your back to a wall." He hung up. She stood on the corner of 68th and Lexington and looked around at the ordinary afternoon. A woman walking a dog, 2 teenagers with enormous headphones, a food cart doing steady business in the cold, and picked the coffee shop on the opposite side of the street because it was narrow and deep with booths against the back wall and only one entrance she could watch from where she'd be sitting. She'd learned that from him. Watching exits. She hadn't asked to learn it. It had happened anyway, the way things that are repeated around you eventually become part of how you see. She ordered coffee she didn't want and sat in the last booth and watched the door. He arrived in 11 minutes, not 15. Kang was outside. She caught the shape of him through the window, that particular stillness by the entrance. Seojun came through the door and scanned the room in under 2 seconds before his eyes found her. And he crossed to the booth and sat down across from her and looked at her the way he had in the hallway of her building, checking her for damage. "I'm fine," she said, before he could ask. "You said that last time too." "And I was fine last time too." He looked at her for another moment. Then he looked at the table. He had the expression of a man who had been composing something on the way here and had now arrived at the moment where it had to be said, and was finding that composing it in his head and saying it out loud were 2 different problems entirely. "Yuna," he said, "and my family. I'll tell you what you need to know." "Tell me everything." "What you need to know," he said again. Not correction, precision. "Because some of it is not mine to tell. And some of it will not make your life safer to know." She opened her mouth. He held up one hand, not commanding, just requesting. "Let me say it the way I know how to say it," he said. "Then you can ask me whatever you want." She sat back, waited. He wrapped both hands around her untouched coffee mug. She registered the small presumption of it and said nothing, and looked at the table and began. His father had built the Han network across 30 years through the specific combination of strategic brilliance and absolute ruthlessness that created things meant to outlast the person who built them. The kind of organization that had contracts and hierarchies and succession plans the way corporations did, because at a certain scale, that's what survival required. When Seojun's father got sick 4 years ago, a diagnosis he'd kept private for 8 months before anyone in the family knew, the succession question became urgent. And the succession question was not only about who would run the network, it was about alliances. About which families would accept Han leadership into the next generation, and which ones would see a transition as an opportunity to take territory. The Park family alliance had been his father's solution. Not a marriage exactly, a formal arrangement, contractual with timelines and conditions, the way business mergers were structured. Yuna Park was the eldest child of Jin-ho Park, who ran the northeastern Atlantic seaboard operations for 3 interconnected Korean-American families. The arrangement would bind their interests, neutralize a potential rival, and give the Han network a structural partner for the transition period. It had been negotiated over 8 months. Seojun had agreed to it because he'd been 26 and his father was dying, and it had seemed like the correct, logical thing to do. "Did you want to marry her?" Zoe asked. He looked up. "No." "Did she know that?" "Yes." A pause. "She has always known that. It didn't change her position because her position was never personal. It was structural. For her family, the arrangement was as important as it was for mine. Zoe thought about the woman on 68th Street, the architectural beauty, the envelope. You think this is about him choosing you. It isn't. What happened to the arrangement? She said. His jaw tightened, the first real physical tell she'd seen from him today. I began pulling back from it 6 months ago. Before the subway. It had nothing to do with you. What did it have to do with? A long pause. My father died 8 weeks before the formal signing ceremony. And when he was gone, what had seemed like the correct logical thing to do began to seem like something else. He looked at her steadily, like the last decision he'd made for me, like the thing that would keep me inside the life he'd built instead of... He stopped. Instead of what? Instead of deciding whether I wanted that life at all? The coffee shop hummed around them, the espresso machine, someone's conversation bleeding over from the next table. Zoe looked at this man, the tattoos above his collar, the broken knuckles, the gray sweater under the same controlled exterior, and understood, with a clarity that felt like something pressing against her sternum, that what he'd just said was probably the most honest thing he'd ever said to anyone. So you were already pulling back, she said, and then you met me, and then I met you. Flat, simple, like stating the weather. And Yuna blamed me for a decision you'd already made. Yes. He looked at her. Which is why her offer to you today concerns me more than the camera did. Zoe frowned. Why more? Because the camera was Volkov, external pressure, easy to read. He set down the coffee mug. Yuna approaching you directly? That's different. That means she's making moves outside the formal structure. It means she's no longer operating through her father. It means she's decided this is personal. Is it personal? A pause. Yes, he said. For her, I think it is. Zoe was quiet. She thought about, does he know you like him? About the way Yuna's face had gone very still. Okay, she said. So we have Volkov using me as leverage for a territory dispute. And we have Yuna using me as, what? A pressure point to get you back into the arrangement? Or as a reason to destabilize my operation enough that I need her family's support to survive it? Those are two very different strategies. They can be the same strategy, he said, if they're working together. The word landed in the space between them. Zoe heard it settle. You think Volkov and Yuna are coordinating? She said. I think the camera was placed the same week Yuna first arrived in New York. His voice was measured. I think it's possible that someone offered Volkov favorable port terms in exchange for creating a leverage situation that would force my hand. He looked at her. This is what I was trying to decide whether to tell you, because knowing it puts me more in the middle. Yes, she sat with it. Let it move through her. The coffee shop, the afternoon light through the window, the ordinary world continuing its business outside. She thought about the envelope on the table between her and Yuna, the clean exit, the relocation contact. She gave me a number, Zoe said, a relocation service. I know who she uses. Of course you do. She looked at him. Is it legitimate? The service? Yes. She's used it twice before for situations she wanted quietly resolved. Situations, Zoe repeated. You mean people? Yes. She looked at her hands flat on the table. So, she's done this before. She's thorough, he said, and there was something in his voice, not admiration, not contempt, something more complicated than either. The acknowledgement of a person you've known long enough to understand completely and trust not at all. I don't want to disappear, Zoe said. I know. I want to go back to my actual life. I want Destiny to stop staying at her cousin's. I want to ride the subway without checking whether anyone's following me. She looked up at him. Is that possible? He held her gaze, and in his eyes she saw the thing she'd been half aware of since the hallway. The thing he kept controlled and managed and pressed back behind the stillness. The thing that had apparently been visible enough to two different dangerous people that they'd both decided she was worth using. I'm working on it, he said. It wasn't a yes. She respected him for not making it one. For 11 days it was quiet. Too quiet, she understood later. The quiet of a storm organizing itself offshore, still far enough away that the sky looked fine. Seojun's security team swept her apartment every 48 hours. She went back to work, back to the Harrington, Back to the R train. Destiny came home. Pavel finished his thesis and finally, genuinely, began looking for his own apartment. The orchids on her windowsill were starting to die. She hadn't replaced the water in 4 days. And she watched them slowly going over and didn't throw them out, and didn't replace the water and didn't examine too closely what either choice meant. Seojun texted. Small things. Practical things. And then increasingly less practical things. A message at 7 in the morning. There's a good documentary about the New York sanitation workers if you're awake. A message at midnight after a shift she'd mentioned. How was it? Small threads thrown across the distance between their lives, and she picked them up and threw them back and told herself this was manageable. This was just two people talking. This was not what it felt like. On the 11th day, he came to Brooklyn. Not to her building. He was careful about that now, careful in ways he hadn't been before, which meant he understood something had changed. He texted to ask if she wanted to walk, which was such an ordinary, almost awkward thing to ask that she'd stood in her kitchen for a full minute staring at the message before she replied. They walked along the waterfront as the sun went down over Manhattan, the skyline going gold and gray in the water, and he talked about things she hadn't expected him to talk about. Not the Empire, not the Alliance or Volkov or Una. The book she'd seen on his shelf, the translation, his father reading it to him as a child, the same passages, until the words had embedded themselves in him like something structural. The particular loneliness of being surrounded by people who feared you. The way violence had started, at some point he couldn't precisely locate, to feel like a language he was tired of speaking. Why are you telling me this? She said. Because you asked me once what I'd do if I wasn't scared of anything. And? He was quiet for a moment. The water moved. A barge pushed slowly toward the harbor. I think I'd tell the truth more often, he said. She looked at him. He was looking at the water, the city behind him, enormous and indifferent, and him standing in it with his hands in his pockets, like a man who had spent a long time being its king and was only now beginning to wonder what the crown was actually for. She didn't say anything, but she moved slightly closer when they walked, and he noticed, and neither of them commented on it. Mutt. The arrest happened at 6 in the morning, 17 days after the conversation on 68th Street. She found out the way she found out most things that happened in his world. From the outside, piecing together fragments, arriving at the truth too slowly. Destiny shook her awake with her phone already showing a news alert. Federal raid targets Manhattan Organized Crime Network. Names unnamed, operation coordinated, 12 arrests across 3 boroughs. Zoe sat up in bed with her heart going very fast and read the alert 3 times. She called Seojun's number. It rang 8 times and went to voicemail. She called the second number. The burner he'd given her, the one Kang sometimes answered. No answer. She called a 3rd time. Nothing. She sat on the edge of her bed in the early morning dark of her apartment and counted her breaths and told herself this didn't necessarily mean what it felt like it meant. Federal operations were large and messy. Names unnamed. She didn't know anything yet. Then Kang called her back. He's in federal custody, he said. No preamble. No softening. Kang had never softened anything in her experience. Taken from the Midtown location at approximately 0500, 3 others from the core organization, the raid was coordinated across 7 sites simultaneously. Zoe was quiet. There's something else, Kang said. Tell me. A pause that she would replay for a long time. The raid was based on an intelligence package submitted to the FBI's Organized Crime Division 6 weeks ago. We've confirmed the source. Another pause, shorter and harder. The intelligence came from the Park family. The room was very still. Una, she said. Yes. She thought about the controlled beauty on 68th Street. The envelope. I'm not telling you this to threaten you. She thought about Seojun at the waterfront saying, I think I'd tell the truth more often. She thought about 11 days of quiet. They fed the FBI information to have him arrested, she said. To have him removed from operation while they negotiate the restructuring terms, Kang said. Standard destabilization. If he's in federal custody, the organization has to consolidate quickly or lose territory to competitors. The Park family positions itself as the stabilizing partner. When he's released, if he's released, he's weakened enough to accept whatever terms they offer. How long can they hold him? Depends on what they've given. If the intelligence package is comprehensive enough to support charges, a pause. Months, potentially longer. Zoe stood up. She was still in her sleep clothes. The morning light was coming through the curtains, gray and thin, the kind of autumn light that gave nothing. Is he talking to a lawyer? His legal team is already in contact. What do you need from me? A pause, different from the others. Nothing, Kang said. This isn't something you're involved in. Kang. Ms. Mercer. He's in federal custody because someone decided I was the lever to use. She said it flat and clear. That involves me. What do you need? Another pause. Longer. She could almost hear him deciding whether she was a liability or a resource. Nothing right now, he said finally. Stay in your routine. Don't change your pattern. If anything changes at your end, anything, you call me immediately. He hung up. She stood in the early morning light of her Brooklyn apartment with her dead phone in her hand and the full weight of it pressing down on her chest. The orchids on the windowsill were almost entirely gone now. Petals dried and curled, the color leached out of them. She hadn't replaced them. She hadn't thrown them away. She looked at them for a long time. Then she went and made coffee and sat at the kitchen table and thought very carefully for the first time about what she actually knew and what she could actually do. She went to see Yuna. She didn't call ahead. She didn't ask Kang's permission or tell Destiny or do anything that would give anyone time to talk her out of it. She got dressed, got on the train, and went to the Park family's Manhattan address, a building on the Upper East Side she'd found in 12 minutes of searching, because the Park family were legitimate enough to have a registered business address and visible enough that the information wasn't hidden. The doorman at the building stopped her at the lobby. Yuna Park, Zoe said. Tell her Zoe Mercer is here. The doorman looked at her, her second-hand coat, her worn boots, the canvas bag with the recently repaired strap. He picked up the phone with the expression of a man performing a courtesy he expected to resolve quickly. 30 seconds later, his expression changed. You can go up, he said. 14th floor. The elevator was silent and mirrored, and Zoe looked at herself on the way up. Dark circles, jaw set, the specific look on her face of someone who had made a decision they weren't going to unmake. She looked like exactly what she was, a woman from Flatbush who was tired of being used as furniture. Yuna opened the door herself. She was in different clothes than the last time. Casual, almost by her standards, which still meant a cashmere sweater and tailored pants. And her expression when she saw Zoe was the same controlled assessment as always, but underneath it, something flickered. Something that might have been surprise or might have been preparation. Ms. Mercer, she said. You had him arrested, Zoe said. Skip the performance. I know what you did. Yuna stepped back from the door. An invitation. Zoe walked in. The apartment was what she'd expected. Perfect. Precise. The kind of space that communicated power through restraint. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan spread out in the flat gray morning light. Yuna stood near the windows and turned to face her. What would you like me to say? Yuna said, calm, not defensive. I want you to explain to me, Zoe said, what the endgame is. Because you offered me a way out 3 weeks ago, and then when I didn't take it, you escalated to federal charges. So I want to know what happens after this. She crossed her arms. Does he take your terms when he gets out? Do your families merge? Do you get the arrangement your father negotiated, and this whole thing gets packaged back up and resolved, and I go back to being nobody from Brooklyn who nobody cares about? Yuna looked at her. That would be the best outcome, she said, for everyone. For everyone, Zoe repeated. He goes to prison. He comes out weakened. He accepts your terms. You get the alliance. Volkov gets his port access. Your father is satisfied. And I... Go back to your life, Yuna said, which is what you said you wanted. Zoe looked at her. In the flat morning light, Yuna's face was very still and very composed. And also, she noticed now in a way she hadn't on 68th Street, very tired. Not physically. Something older than that. The tiredness of someone who had been strategic for so long they'd forgotten what it felt like to want something without calculating it first. You love him, Zoe said. Yuna's expression didn't change. That's an irrelevant, do you love him? A pause. Very slight. Very controlled. But there. I have known Seojun Han for 9 years, Yuna said quietly. I know things about him that nobody else knows. I know what his father did to him to make him what he is. I know what it cost him. I know what he's capable of and what he wants and what he'll never let himself have. She looked at Zoe with something that was stripped of strategy, just for a moment. And I know that what you're doing to him, this accidental, thoughtless, civilian thing you're doing just by existing near him, is more dangerous than anything his enemies have tried in 6 years, because you're making him soft. And soft men in his position. He's not soft, Zoe said. He walked a waterfront in Brooklyn for 2 hours like a normal person. Yuna's voice was sharp now, the control cracking slightly. He sends grocery deliveries and texts at midnight and reads books with a woman who serves champagne for a living. He is becoming someone who wants things for himself. Do you understand what that means in his world? Do you understand how many people are waiting for exactly that kind of weakness? The apartment was very quiet. Zoe held all of it. So you arrested him, she said, to protect him. To reset the board, Yuna said. Her composure was fully restored. The crack was gone. To give him a reason to return to the structure that keeps him alive. To give him a reason to come back to you. A pause. To the arrangement. That's the same thing. Yuna looked at her with the expression of someone who has just had something true said to them and hated the person for saying it. What do you want, Miss Mercer? She said. Genuinely. You turned down the money. You've come here alone without telling his people. You're not stupid and you're not reckless. So there's something you want from this conversation. What is it? Zoe thought about it. Honestly, standing in this apartment in this light with this woman who had 9 years on her and knew things she'd never know. I want you to tell me what he doesn't know, she said. Yuna frowned. What do you mean? The intelligence package, the FBI raid. Zoe looked at her steadily. You said his father made him what he is. What did you mean? What does that have to do with what you gave the FBI? The stillness that came over Yuna's face was different from all the other stillnesses. This one was real. This one was a wall going up fast. That's not your concern. You just made it my concern. Ms. Mercer, you mentioned his father specifically. You said you know what was done to him. Zoe took one step forward. If there's something in that intelligence package about his father, something Seojun doesn't know, you're going to tell me, right now. Yuna stared at her. The morning light flattened everything in the apartment, the perfect surfaces, the restrained wealth. The 9 years of knowing someone and the particular damage that kind of knowledge left in a person. Yuna looked at Zoe the way people look at things they've underestimated, with the slow recalibration of someone whose model of a situation has just been revised. Sit down, Yuna said. Zoe sat, and Yuna told her. It took 18 minutes. Zoe sat without moving through all of it. The intelligence package the Park family had assembled for the FBI was comprehensive. Financial records, operational documentation, testimony from 3 former Han network associates, evidence of specific actions across 8 years. But the core of it, the piece that had made the FBI move as fast and as hard as they had, was older than any of that. Seojun's father had been an FBI informant for the last 7 years of his life. Not coerced, not reluctant. A voluntary, structured, financially compensated arrangement that had begun when the senior Han was diagnosed and had concluded only with his death. In exchange for information that had resulted in 4 major prosecutions and the collapse of 2 rival organizations, the FBI had guaranteed protection for the Han network during the transition period following his death. The guarantee had now expired. The intelligence package Yuna had submitted had not created new criminal exposure for Seojun. It had simply reminded the FBI that the protection agreement was no longer operative. He doesn't know, Zoe said. No, Yuna said. He believed his father's network survived the transition because of his own work, because of his own strength. A pause. The FBI let him believe it. It was in their interest to let him believe it. Zoe looked at her hands. His entire operation, she said, the last 4 years. He thought he'd built it. He thought he'd earned the loyalty and the territory and the position, and the whole time he was operating under a dead man's deal that he didn't know existed, Yuna said quietly. And now the deal is dead too. The city moved outside the windows, the gray light, the indifferent skyline. Why are you telling me this? Zoe said. Yuna was quiet for a moment. Because you asked, and because... She stopped. Something passed across her face that was almost human. Because he's going to find out. When his lawyers get into the charging documents, he's going to find out. And whoever is standing next to him when that happens... She looked at Zoe with something that might have been the closest she could get to kindness. It shouldn't be someone who doesn't understand what they're looking at. Zoe sat in the silence of the apartment, in the silence of what she now knew. Seojun in federal custody. The empire he thought he'd built standing on a foundation he'd never seen. The father who'd died leaving behind a deal instead of a legacy, and a son who'd spent 4 years believing in something that had been, quietly, entirely different from what he thought. She stood up. Her legs were steady. She was surprised by this. When his lawyers pull the charging documents, she said. How long? 48 hours, Yuna said. Maybe 72. Zoe picked up her bag. If you go to him now, Yuna said, you're choosing a man whose entire foundation is about to be destroyed. You understand that. I know. His reaction when he finds out, Yuna paused. I've known him 9 years. I've never seen him not in control. I don't know what he looks like when everything he believed about himself is... Neither do I, Zoe said. She walked to the door. Ms. Mercer. Yuna's voice stopped her. She turned. Yuna was standing by the windows, the city behind her, and her face had something on it that 9 years of strategy and formal arrangements and controlled composure had not entirely managed to bury. For what it's worth, he wouldn't have told anyone else what he told you on that waterfront. I know that with certainty. A pause. I've been waiting 9 years for him to want something for himself. Zoe looked at her. I know, she said. I'm sorry. She left. Chuck. Kang was waiting in the lobby. She didn't know how he'd known she was here. She'd stopped asking how he knew things. I need to see him, she said. Kang looked at her with the closed-door face. That's not possible right now. It will be possible in 48 hours when his lawyers pull the charging documents and he finds out what his father did. She met his eyes. I need to see him before that. You know I do. Kang was still for a long moment. She could feel him processing, weighing factors she couldn't name in a calculation she didn't have full access to. The particular stillness of a man who had spent years reading situations and making fast decisions and living with them. There's a federal holding facility in Lower Manhattan, he said finally. His lawyers have a scheduled visit at 4 o'clock today. Can I go with them? No. Flat. But there's a processing window at 2 where civilian contact visits are logged as attorney support. If you're in the building by 1:45 and your name is on the approved contact list, he stopped, looked at her. It would need to be on the list already. Is it on the list? A pause. It will be, he said. She took the subway downtown alone, Kang's men somewhere behind her, invisible, always invisible, and sat in the rattling car with her hands in her lap and thought about a man who had built 4 years of empire on a foundation made of his dead father's secret, who had chosen restraint over violence, who had said, I'm still learning, like it was a wound, who had walked a waterfront in Brooklyn and told her the truth about being tired. She thought about what he was going to look like when the charging documents came through, when the lawyers put the papers in front of him and the foundation fell. She thought about what Yuna had said. I don't know what he looks like when everything he believed about himself is... She knew. She knew because she had seen the crack in the wall from the beginning, the thing that showed through the stillness when he wasn't paying attention to keeping it in. She'd been watching it her whole life in different people. The moment when someone who has survived on control and construction and careful maintenance finds out that the structure was always thinner than they thought. She'd seen it in herself, in the mirror, in the Flatbush apartment at 2 in the morning with the overdue bills and the bruised apples. The moment you realize the invisible life you'd built isn't protection. It's just a smaller version of the cage you'd been trying to escape. The train came into the station. She got off. She walked toward the federal building in the flat October light. Behind her, the city went on doing what it always did. Enormous, indifferent, grinding forward without reference to any individual moving through it. At 1:43, she pushed through the lobby door of the federal building, gave her name at the desk, and waited. At 2:01, they called her through. She walked down a hallway that smelled of industrial cleaner and recycled air and fluorescent light, and the specific institutional nothing smell of places designed to hold people without reference to who they were before they arrived. At the end of the hallway, a door. She went through. He was already sitting at the table when she came in, and the look on his face when he saw her was the thing she'd been afraid of and the thing she'd been moving toward since the R train at midnight 3 weeks ago. Unguarded. Completely, entirely unguarded. Like a man who had spent years perfecting the stillness and found, in this moment, that he'd forgotten how to use it. "You shouldn't be here," he said. His voice was rough. "I know," she said. She sat down across from him. "I'm going to tell you something you need to hear before your lawyers do." His eyes sharpened. "What?" She looked at him. The broken knuckles, the tattoos, the jaw that had healed wrong from some old violence. The man underneath all of it who had learned to want things quietly and alone because wanting things loudly had cost him too much. "Your father," she said. "I need to tell you about your father." Something moved in his face. Not the crack, not the wall opening. Something deeper than that. The expression of a man who has just heard the one sentence in the world. The sentence hung in the air between them. Seojun went very still. Not the controlled stillness she'd seen before. Not the cultivated, managed flatness of a man who had trained himself into calm over years of necessity. This was something else. The stillness of something interrupted at the cellular level, like watching a machine receive a command it didn't have a protocol for. "What about my father?" he said. His voice was different, stripped of the usual register, just the words coming out quiet and level, the way things come out when a person is working very hard to maintain a surface they can feel starting to give. She told him. She didn't soften it. She'd made that decision on the subway, that if she was going to do this, she was going to do it clearly, because Seojun Han was a man who had been managed and strategic and arranged around for his entire adult life. And what he actually needed, maybe the only thing he actually needed, was someone who would hand him the truth without packaging it. So she told him about the agreement, about the 7 years, about the 4 prosecutions, and the 2 organizations that had fallen, and the protection guarantee that had kept the Han network standing through the transition period, while Seojun believed he was holding it up himself. She told him about Yuna's intelligence package, about the charging documents his lawyers would see in 48 hours. She told him all of it in a federal visiting room that smelled of institutional nothing, with the fluorescent light making both of them look pale, and the table between them bolted to the floor. When she stopped, he didn't move. 30 seconds. She counted them. Then he stood up. He turned away from her and put both hands flat on the wall and stood there with his back to her, not moving, and the sound that came from him was barely audible, not speech, not a name, just a breath that had been pushed out from somewhere too deep to manage, like something giving way underground. She didn't speak. She sat with it. When he turned back around, his face was a mask, fully reconstructed, every surface controlled, but his eyes were wrong. The thing behind them, the crack she'd always been able to see, had become something else, not open, fractured. "She told you this," he said. "Yes." "Yuna." "Yes." His jaw worked once, stopped. "Why?" "She said it shouldn't be someone who doesn't understand what they're looking at." Something moved through his expression too fast to name and was gone. 4 years, he said, quiet, almost to himself. Every territory dispute, every negotiation, every time I held the line and thought, he stopped, pressed his teeth together, started again. I held a line that wasn't under pressure, because the FBI had already cleared the field. He looked at her. Everything I thought I built. "You built it," she said. "The guarantee protected the structure. You ran it. Don't." His voice cut across hers, not loud, precise. "Don't do that. Don't make it smaller than it is." She held it. He was right. She didn't do it again. He sat back down. Slowly. The way a person sits when their legs have decided to do it before their head agreed. He put his hands on the table and looked at them. The broken knuckles, the ink. And she watched him do something she'd never seen him do. Struggle. Openly, visibly, without the management. Like the mechanism that usually processed things quietly had seized. "My father," he said, "spent 30 years telling me that what we built survived because of who we were. Because we were smarter, Because we were harder. A pause. Because Han men didn't need protection. Han men were the thing other people needed protection from. He looked up. His eyes were very dark and very flat. He was feeding the FBI the whole time. He was dying, she said, carefully. He was trying to protect the transition. He was lying, Seojun said, to me, for 7 years. A beat. Watching me believe in something that didn't exist. She didn't answer. There was nothing to say to that. It was true. She knew it was true and he knew it was true, and the truth of it was sitting between them in that bolted-down room like a third person at the table. I have to get out of here, he said. I know. Not just, I mean, out of this building, out of custody. He looked at her with the sharpened focus of a man who had just converted shock into motion, the way people do when staying still becomes more dangerous than moving. What does Kang know? He knows I'm here. He knows what I went to Yuna for. He doesn't know what she told me. Call him. He glanced at the door. You have your phone. She took it out. Kang answered before the second ring. Tell him, Seojun said. She put it on the table between them and told Kang in 3 sentences. There was a pause on the other end that she recognized as the Kang equivalent of someone else's entire emotional reaction. How long until the charging documents? Kang said. 48 hours if we're lucky, Seojun said. 36 if we're not. The legal team can file for review and delay disclosure by 72 hours, Kang said. I'll call Park now. Don't call Park, Seojun said. If the documents go through, I said don't call Park. His voice had changed again. Something had come into it. Not the fractured thing, not the mask. Something older. The voice of a man who had just been handed a very specific kind of anger and had decided to make use of it. Get me out of here. That's the priority. Everything else waits. A pause. There's a bail hearing scheduled for tomorrow morning. We can push to have it moved up. Tonight, potentially, if... Tonight, Seojun said. I'll see what can be arranged. Kang. A beat. The Park family gave the FBI what they needed to make this arrest. Make sure our lawyers understand that when they walk into that hearing, make sure the judge understands there is a competing organizational interest that manufactured this prosecution. Another pause. That's a significant allegation to make publicly. I know. He looked at Zoe. Make it anyway. Kang ended the call. Seojun sat across from her in the flat light and looked at her the way he'd looked at her when she came through the door. Unguarded. The constructed distance collapsed. She'd gotten used to seeing the crack. This was different. This was the whole wall down. You went to her alone, he said. Yes. Without telling Kang. He would have told me no. He would have been right. I know, she said. I went anyway. He studied her face, the specific attention, the cataloging, but different now. Closer to something she didn't want to name in a fluorescent federal visiting room with a guard outside the door. Why? He said. Quiet. Simple. She looked at him. She thought about the app on her counter she never replaced, the orchids she never threw away, the grocery bag full of good cheese and the text at midnight that said, "Are you eating?" She thought about everything she'd told herself it wasn't. You know why? She said. He held it. Something moved across his face, not the crack, not the wall. Something that had been there from the beginning and that he'd been managing and containing and pressing back, and that the last 30 minutes had stripped the management from. When I get out, he said slowly, what's coming is not going to be orchids and grocery deliveries. He was looking at her steadily. Yuna moved against me directly. That changes what I have to do. What Volkov and the Park family built together has to come apart. And coming apart won't be, I know what it won't be, she said. Do you? I've been standing in your world for a month, she said. I know what it looks like when things come apart. His jaw worked. You should go home. You don't get to tell me that anymore. Zoe, you don't get to tell me that, she said again. Level, clear. Whatever comes next, I'm not disappearing. Not for Yuna. Not for your safety protocols. Not because it's the sensible thing. She met his eyes. You told me the truth on that waterfront. I came here today. We are past the point where you protect me by keeping me in the dark. He was very still. "If I ask you to stay safe," he said. Quiet. "If I ask you to not be in the middle of it, not because I'm managing you, because I can't—" He stopped, started again. "Because there are things I won't be able to control, and you being in the range of those things is the one variable that—" He stopped again. His hands were flat on the table. She looked at them. "That what?" she said. He looked at her. Straight at her. The wall was down and she saw what had been behind it, and it was not surprising and it was enormous, and it had been there since a bruised apple on a train floor. "That I can't think around," he said. The guard knocked once on the door. Time. She stood up. She picked up her bag. She looked at him one more time across the bolted table in the bad light. "Get out of here," she said. "Then we'll figure out the rest." She walked out, down the hallway, through the lobby, into the October air. Her hands were shaking again. She walked a full block before she stopped, pressed her back against a building, and let herself feel the full weight of what she'd just done, and what she'd just said, and what she was now, irrevocably, in the middle of. She stood there for 30 seconds. Then she straightened up, pulled her coat tighter, and started walking. Oh, he was out by 9:17 that night. She knew because Kang texted her one word. Done. She was at her apartment, not the Upper East Side, her apartment, her real one with the orchid vases and the creaking floor and Destiny watching television in the next room. She'd come back because she'd needed the ordinary of it, the particular texture of her own life around her. She sat on the edge of her bed and stared at Kang's text. Then Seojun texted from a number she hadn't seen before. "New phone, Of course, new phone. I know you're at the apartment. Don't, not tonight." She typed back. "Where then?" A pause. "Give me 2 hours." She gave him 2 hours. She sat in her kitchen with Destiny, who had the careful, watchful expression of a woman who had been staying at her cousin's without a full explanation and had arrived home to find her roommate visibly in the middle of something she didn't understand. Destiny didn't ask. She made tea and put a mug in front of Zoe and sat down and turned on the television and said nothing, which was one of the most generous things anyone had ever done for Zoe. At 11:20, a text. "Ready." He sent an address. Brooklyn. Not far. 15 minutes on the train, 10 in a car. She told Destiny she'd be back, and Destiny looked at her with the expression of someone choosing not to say multiple things. "Be careful," Destiny said. "I will." "I mean, actually be careful, Zoe. Not your version of careful." Zoe almost smiled. "I know." She went. Whammed. The address was a brownstone in Carroll Gardens that she'd walked past 100 times without registering. 3 stories, dark red brick, the kind of building that had been in someone's family long enough that it had absorbed the character of all of them. No lights in the front windows. Kang was outside on the stoop, visible for once, arms crossed and breath misting in the cold. He looked at her when she came up the steps, the closed-door face. But something different behind it tonight. Not the assessment of liability or resource. Something closer to the expression of a man who had spent 15 years working for someone and had just watched that person hit the lowest point he'd ever seen, and was not entirely sure what came next. "He's inside," Kang said. "How is he?" A pause. "Functioning," Kang said, which from Kang she understood to mean not well, but moving. She went in. The interior of the brownstone was nothing like the Upper East Side apartment. This was lived in, properly lived in, the furniture old and comfortable, books actually organized by subject on actual shelves, a kitchen that smelled like someone had been cooking hours ago. She found out later it had belonged to one of Seojun's earliest associates, a man who'd died 3 years before, and left it to him without explanation. He'd kept it exactly as it was. He came here sometimes when the Midtown residence felt like a performance. He was in the kitchen, standing at the counter with a glass of water, still in the clothes he'd been arrested in. The shirt creased, the jacket gone. He looked like he'd been through something. He looked like himself, underneath it. He turned when she came in. "Sit down," she said. "I'm fine standing. You've been in federal custody for 15 hours, and you found out your father built your entire life on a foundation you didn't know existed. Sit down." He sat down. She sat across from him at the old kitchen table. "Bail conditions," she said. "Restricted travel, regular check-ins, no contact with named associates." He looked at her. Kang is technically not on the list. Loophole. What about Yuna? No contact order covers the Park family. A pause. Which doesn't stop them from taking action. It just means I can't respond through direct contact. What can you respond through? His eyes moved to hers. Legal and financial countermeasures. I've already instructed the lawyers to file a complaint with the Organized Crime Division alleging prosecutorial manipulation. It won't stick immediately, but it will create noise. It will make the FBI aware that the Park family used them. Will that be enough? No. Flat. But it buys time. He looked at his water glass. The real problem isn't the charges. The charges can be managed. The evidence they have is circumstantial at the core. Yuna's package was designed to destabilize, not to convict. The real problem is the next 30 days. While I'm on bail and restricted, the network is visible. Every competing interest that's been waiting for a weakness. He stopped. Volkov will move on the port operations. The Reyes family in Queens has been watching our southern territory for 2 years. 3 smaller operations will test the edges. And the Park family? Will wait, he said, and watch, and position themselves as the solution. She looked at him. Yuna will offer the arrangement again. Through my board members, not to me directly. A pause. By the time the bail review comes up in 6 weeks, they expect me to be weakened enough that my own people will be pushing me toward the alliance. He looked at her. It's a good strategy. Don't say that. It's true. I know it's true, she said. You don't have to admire it. Something moved in his face. Almost, close to what she'd have called a smile, in different circumstances, with less federal bail conditions between them. What are you going to do? She said. He was quiet, looking at the table, then at her, then past her at the old kitchen with the faded wallpaper and the herbs dried and hanging by the window the way whoever had lived here had left them. I have to decide something, he said, about what to fight for. The network, and what the network costs. He looked at her directly. The wall was down. She'd gotten used to it in the last few hours and wasn't sure what she was going to do when he put it back. 4 years ago, I agreed to my father's arrangement because I thought it was the correct logical thing. I just found out he'd been protecting the network through the FBI. I'd just watched 30 years of something he built hold together through the transition. He paused. I thought I was choosing to honor what he built. I thought the arrangement was part of that. You were 26 and your father was dying. I was 26 and I didn't have a single thing I wanted for myself, he said. That was the real reason. Not logic, not strategy. He pressed his knuckles against the table, not hard, just the habit. I didn't know what wanting something felt like. It felt dangerous. It felt like a liability. He looked at her, and then one bruised apple. The kitchen was very quiet. I can't let you be a liability, he said. I don't mean it the way it sounds. I mean, I can't think of you as one, and right now I need to be able to think clearly about everything. I'm not asking you to protect me. I know you're not. He looked at her. That's the problem. Every other person in my life needs something from me. Protection, money, access, direction. And you need the eggs I owe you from a broken bag. She blinked. That was weeks ago. I know. Something in his voice. Underneath the rawness of the night, something careful. I still owe you eggs. She looked at him. Sitting across from her at a dead man's kitchen table with 15 hours of federal custody on him and a father's secret dismantling everything he thought he'd known about himself, and he'd remembered the eggs. She reached across the table and put her hand over his. He went still, completely still. Not the controlled stillness, the stillness of something that hasn't been touched in a long time and doesn't know how to receive it. Figure out the network, she said. Figure out Volkov and the Park family and the territory disputes. Do what you have to do. She held his gaze. I'll be here. Not because I'm waiting for you to be safe, because I'm not going anywhere. He turned his hand over, held hers. Neither of them moved for a long time. The next 18 days were a controlled war conducted through lawyers and financial instruments, and the specific, invisible violence of organizational pressure applied at critical points. Zoe watched it from a particular distance, close enough to understand what was happening, far enough that she maintained her own life around it. She went to work. She rode the subway. She and Destiny cooked dinner twice a week with the good groceries and the television and the normal disaster of two people sharing a small space. She slept in her own bed in her own apartment and checked in daily with Kang and talked to Seojun most nights on the phone. Long calls, substantive, nothing soft about them except that they happened at all. He was meticulous in what he told her and she was ruthless in what she asked. She learned the structure of the network in a way she'd never planned to. The territory, the alliances, the specific leverage points. She told herself this was practical. She told herself knowing the shape of a thing helped you survive it. 3 of Seojun's board members had already taken meetings with Park family representatives. He knew this. He didn't stop them. He watched and noted and moved money and contracts in ways they couldn't see yet and waited. Volkov made a move on the port operations on the 12th day. It was swift and well-coordinated, and it lost them 3 access contracts and $14 million in quarterly revenue. Seojun's response came through legal and financial channels, a cascade of documented violations submitted to the relevant regulatory bodies, 2 forfeiture claims, a withdrawn shipping license that had taken Volkov 6 years to accumulate. Not fast, not violent, precise. Volkov, she learned from Kang, had responded to this with a level of fury that was apparently unusual even for him. He expected retaliation he could see, Kang told her. He doesn't know how to respond to paperwork. Neither does most organized crime, she said. No, Kang said, and the closed-door face did something that might have been approval. But on the 16th day, everything changed. Umat. She got the call at 3 in the morning. Not Seojun, not Kang, a number she didn't recognize, and she almost didn't answer. And then she answered because it was 3 in the morning, and unknown numbers at 3 in the morning were never good things. Ms. Mercer, a man's voice, flat, accented, the kind of English that had been learned precisely and without warmth. This is a courtesy call. She was already sitting up, already fully awake with her heart going at twice its rate. Who is this? My employer would like you to understand that the current situation has become untenable. Mr. Han's legal interference with the port operations has created losses that require a response beyond what has been discussed previously. I don't know what you're talking about, she said. Automatic. Buying time. You know exactly what I'm talking about. A pause. My employer is prepared to resolve this matter without additional escalation. The terms are simple. Mr. Han withdraws the regulatory complaints filed against the Eastern port operations and removes the forfeiture claims. In exchange, the current pressure on his organization will cease. And if he doesn't, a pause, long enough that she felt it, then the pressure will become personal, the voice said. Do you understand what I mean by personal, Ms. Mercer? Her hand tightened on the phone. I understand. Good. We would like an answer in 24 hours. A beat. And Ms. Mercer, it would be best not to call Mr. Han directly with this. He will make an emotional decision. We would prefer a practical one. The call ended. She sat in the dark of her bedroom with Destiny asleep on the other side of the wall and the city doing its indifferent 3 a.m. thing outside her window and stared at the phone in her hand. She was being used as the channel. They were telling her before Seojun because they expected her to either withhold it, protecting him from an emotional decision, or bring it to him and influence how he heard it. Either way, she was the mechanism. She called Seojun. He answered in 2 rings. It's 3 in the morning. I know, someone just called me. She told him, every word exactly as she remembered it, silence on the other end. The specific silence she now recognized as him, processing fast and hard and moving pieces into position. Are you at the apartment? He said. Yes. Stay there. Kang will be outside in 10 minutes. A pause. Don't open the door for anyone but him. Seojun, Zoe. His voice had something in it she hadn't heard before. Not the control, not the rawness from the kitchen table. Something thinner than both. Something that sounded, if she pressed it, like fear. Please, 10 minutes. Okay, she said. She got up. She put on clothes. She went to the window and looked at the street below. The usual 3 a.m. emptiness, a single cab moving slowly through the intersection. Normal. Everything normal. Kang arrived in 9 minutes. She heard the specific pattern of his knock. 3, then 2, and opened the door. He came in and did the sweep of the apartment in 4 minutes flat while she stood in the kitchen, and when he came back, his face was the closed door face with something underneath it that she couldn't read. Clean, he said. I know it's clean, she said. What are we doing? Mr. Han is moving the timeline up, Kang said. The call tonight means Volkov is escalating ahead of schedule. We expected another week before direct contact with you. You expected them to contact me. We expected an attempt to use you as leverage eventually, he said. We did not anticipate direct communication. She stared at him. You prepared for me to be used as leverage, and you didn't tell me. We were managing the risk. Don't! Her voice came out sharp. Don't tell me you were managing the risk. I am not a risk to be managed. I am a person who needed to know that I was being positioned as a target so that I could make an informed choice. You're right, Kang said. She stopped. He looked at her steadily. You're right. You should have been told. Mr. Han made the decision to withhold it. I disagreed. A pause. For what it's worth. She looked at him. In 15 years of working for Seojun Han, she doubted Kang had admitted disagreement about many decisions. What's moving up, she said. What timeline? There's an emergency board meeting scheduled for tomorrow morning, Kang said. 3 of your board members are prepared to vote for accepting the Park Alliance terms. Mr. Han needs to address it before the vote happens, or the organizational pressure from inside becomes as significant as what Volkov is applying from outside. Can he stop it? He can counter it, but the counter requires him to present an alternative to the alliance, something that demonstrates the network can survive and stabilize without the Park family support. Kang looked at her. He has something prepared, but the timing now... A knock at the door. Hard. Not Kang's pattern. Not anyone's pattern she recognized. Everything in the apartment went very still. Kang moved toward the door. His hand was at his side in the particular way of someone whose hand was not actually empty. He looked through the peephole. Something changed in his posture, said minimal, barely perceptible. But she'd been reading small physical signals for a month, and she caught it. Back of the apartment, he said quietly. Now. Zoe. He didn't look at her. Now. Please. She moved. She went down the hall to her bedroom, shut the door, pressed her back against the wall beside the window the way she'd done in the Flatbush hallway with her grocery bag what felt like a year ago. She could hear the front door opening. Kang's voice, low and even. Another voice she didn't know. Muffled exchange, too quiet to make out. Then quiet. Then Kang appeared in her doorway. It's a message, he said. Delivered physically. From Volkov. He held out an envelope. She took it, opened it. Inside was a photograph. Her. On the R train this morning. Yesterday morning now. Reading something on her phone, not looking up. The image was taken from close. 2 seats away at most. She had not noticed anyone. She had been on the train she'd taken 100 times, and she had not noticed. Below the photograph, handwritten, 24 hours. She looked at it for a long time. The photograph of herself sitting on the R train being ordinary. Being the invisible woman she'd been trying to stay. Being the woman who was supposed to be too small for any of this to touch. She looked up at Kang. Call Seojun, she said. Tell him I need to be in the room tomorrow, the board meeting. She held up the photograph. Not because I'm leverage, because I'm done being the person this happens to without being the person who responds. Kang looked at her for a moment. He won't want that, he said. I know. The risk? I'm already at risk, she said. Volkov knows my face, my train, my schedule. Hiding in this apartment while Seojun fights a board vote doesn't make me safer. It just makes me useless. Kang held her gaze. The closed-door face. And then, slowly, and with the particular deliberateness of a man who did not make decisions carelessly, he nodded. He took out his phone. Seojun answered immediately. Kang spoke. Listened. She could hear the tone of Seojun's voice from across the room. Sharp, controlled, The specific frequency of a man receiving information he doesn't want. Kang held the phone toward her. She took it. No, Seojun said. His voice was flat and absolute. The board meeting is at 9, she said. No. They're going to vote for the alliance on... I will handle the board meeting, he said. You are not going to be in that room. I'm already in all the rooms, she said. I've been in the room since the first night at the Harrington. The only difference now is whether I choose to be or whether it keeps happening to me. A pause. You told me you couldn't think around me being in range of things you couldn't control. I heard you. Her voice steadied. Now I'm telling you. I can't stand outside the range of this anymore. It's not protecting me, it's just isolating me. Silence on the line. She could hear him breathing, the particular breath of a man fighting against the pull of an argument he couldn't fully counter. If something happens to you in that room, he said, very quiet. If any of those men, then we deal with it, she said, together. A long pause. Outside her window, the city was moving into the gray margin before dawn, the sky lightening imperceptibly, the first sounds of morning starting up under the dark. Garbage trucks, a car alarm, the R train moving somewhere under the street, carrying people toward their invisible lives. She waited. 9 o'clock, he said finally. And then, after a silence that contained everything neither of them was saying, don't be late. She looked at the photograph in her hand, her own face. The woman on the train who'd looked ordinary enough, invisible enough, small enough to be used as a prop in someone else's war. She set it face down on the nightstand. I won't be, she said. The line went quiet between them. Not disconnected. She could still hear his breathing, uneven now in the way it got when the control had slipped just enough. She held the phone and listened to it. Zoe, he said. Yeah. A pause. Long enough that she felt it move through her chest. Don't... He stopped, started again. When it's over, whatever happens in that room, don't... He didn't finish the sentence. She understood it anyway. I know, she said. I won't. She ended the call and stood in her bedroom in the last dark before morning and felt the full weight of what tomorrow was. The board meeting, Volkov's 24-hour deadline, 3 years of an empire built on a dead man's secret, and 1 month of a woman who wouldn't disappear pressing against all of it until something had to... She didn't sleep. She lay on top of the covers in her clothes and watched the ceiling go from black to gray to the particular washed-out white of a New York October morning, and she thought about everything and nothing in the specific way of someone whose mind has been running hard for so long it started lapping itself. She thought about the photograph on the nightstand. She thought about Seojun's voice on the phone, don't, and the silence where the rest of the sentence should have been. She thought about her father, who had left when she was 9, and her mother, who had stayed but checked out somewhere around the same time, and the particular education that kind of childhood gave you in the mechanics of people who couldn't say what they meant and expected you to understand anyway. She'd gotten very good at understanding anyway. At 7:15, she got up, washed her face, made coffee. Destiny came out of her room at 7:30 and looked at Zoe standing at the kitchen counter in yesterday's clothes with the expression of a woman who understood exactly what kind of night her roommate had just had. Eat something, Destiny said. I'm not hungry. I didn't ask if you were hungry. Destiny put bread in the toaster and stood at the counter and didn't speak. The toast came up. She put it in front of Zoe with butter and the good jam. The one from the groceries Seojun had sent. The one Zoe had been rationing because she wasn't buying another jar of a $12 jam on her salary. Zoe looked at it, ate it, tasted nothing. Are you going to tell me what's happening? Destiny said. Not right now. Are you safe? Zoe thought about the photograph. Right now, yes. Destiny looked at her for a long moment with the particular expression of a woman who had grown up in conditions that required you to know when someone was telling you the truth and when they were telling you the functional version of it. She'd grown up in conditions like that too. It was one of the things they'd never needed to explain to each other. Come home tonight, Destiny said. I will, Zoe said. She meant it. She didn't know if it was going to be true. Matt. The car came at 8:30. Not Kang, another man she recognized from Seojun's circle, quiet and correct, who held the door without speaking. She got in. The city moved past the windows in the flat morning light, and she watched it and breathed and did what she'd always done in the moments before something hard. She got very still inside. Not the way Seojun got still, not the constructed management of it. The stillness of someone who had learned very young that the feeling in your chest could either run you or inform you, and that the difference was whether you decided to be afraid of it. She'd been afraid of a lot of things. Eviction notices, empty accounts, the particular loneliness of a city that moved around you like water around a stone, touching everything and incorporating nothing. She'd been afraid of this, of mattering to someone who came with consequences, of stepping into a life that had weight and stakes and the specific gravity of real things. She wasn't afraid of it anymore. That was the change she hadn't noticed happening and couldn't precisely locate the moment of. Somewhere between the apple and the federal visiting room, the fear had done its job and moved on and left something else in its place, something quieter and more permanent. The car stopped on a street in Midtown she didn't know, a building with no signage, glass front, the kind of discretion that announced itself through the complete absence of announcement. Kang was at the entrance. He looked at her when she came up. "He's upstairs," Kang said. "How is he?" "Prepared," Kang said. Then, after a beat, "And not glad you're here." "I know." "He'll get over it," Kang said, which was the most she'd ever heard him offer in the direction of reassurance, and she registered it accordingly. She went up. The boardroom was on the 4th floor, and it was already occupied when she arrived. 8 men she didn't know sitting around a long table, all of them in the particular suits of people for whom suits were armor, all of them wearing the tightly controlled expressions of men who had done something they considered necessary and were prepared to defend it. Seojun was standing at the far end of the table. He looked up when she came in. The look he gave her was complicated. Relief and irritation, and something underneath both that he put away before it could be read clearly. He was in a dark suit, composed. The bail restriction creases from yesterday entirely invisible. He looked like what he was, a man who had grown up learning that how you presented yourself in a room was as much a weapon as anything else. He looked like his father's heir. She thought about how much that cost him this morning and said nothing and stood near the back wall. The 3 board members who had met with Park family representatives were sitting together on the left side of the table. She'd been briefed on them by Kang in the car. Names, tenure, the specific financial interests that made the Park Alliance attractive to each of them. She looked at their faces and understood, with the clarity of someone who had spent years reading rooms, that they were not bad men. They were frightened men. Frightened men who would watch their organization destabilized by a federal arrest and a territorial challenge and a months-long hesitation from a leader who had been making decisions that seemed, from inside the structure, like emotional decisions. Seojun began without preamble. He laid out what he knew about the Park family's intelligence submission to the FBI in precise, documented detail. He placed 3 folders on the table: financial records his lawyers had obtained, communications the legal team had surfaced through the regulatory complaint process, a timeline that showed clearly and in irrefutable sequence how the prosecution had been manufactured. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't perform. He presented it the way you present something you don't need to dramatize because the facts are dramatic enough. The room was very quiet. One of the 3, a man in his 50s named Che, who Kang had told her had been with the Han network for 22 years, looked at the documents for a long time without speaking. Then he looked up. "This doesn't change the territorial position," Che said. "Volkov has the port contracts. We're down 14 million in quarterly revenue. Whether the Park family manufactured the arrest or not." "I'm going to tell you something about the port contracts," Seojun said. He set another document on the table. Those contracts were obtained through a regulatory violation that was filed with the relevant bodies 6 days ago. The processing timeline is 8 to 12 weeks. In 8 weeks, Volkov's port access becomes legally untenable and the contracts revert to open bid. He looked at Che. "We have a bid prepared." Silence. "The revenue gap in the meantime," Seojun continued, "is covered by the reallocation I've already executed through the security and investment subsidiaries. You'll find that documentation in the 2nd folder." He looked around the table. "There is no financial crisis. There is a manufactured perception of one. The Park family needed you to believe we were weak enough to need them. We are not." Another long silence. One of the other 3, younger, visibly less certain than he'd been when she walked in, said quietly, "And the federal charges will be resolved," Seojun said. "The complaint to the Organized Crime Division is already creating the outcome I anticipated. The FBI does not enjoy discovering it has been used as an instrument of interorganizational manipulation. The charges will be reviewed within 60 days and most will be dropped." A pause. "The process will be uncomfortable. I won't pretend otherwise. But it will not be fatal." He looked around the room. The room looked back. She watched the weight of it moving, the recalibration happening behind eyes, the reassessment of a situation that had looked one way 3 days ago and was starting to look different in the flat light of this morning. "The question on the table," Seojun said, "is whether this organization is going to accept an alliance forged through coercion and manipulation, or whether we are going to stand on what we've built and deal with the consequences of standing." He was quiet for a moment. "I'm aware that this is not the easiest path. I'm aware that the last 6 weeks have been difficult and that some of you have had conversations you felt were necessary. I'm not asking you to apologize for that." He looked at Che. "I'm asking you to make a clear-eyed decision about what we actually are and what we're willing to become." The room was still. Che looked at his folder, at the documents, at the man standing at the end of the table who had spent 6 weeks being arrested and destabilized and stripped of things he'd believed about himself and had shown up this morning clear-eyed and prepared anyway. "I won't vote for the alliance," Che said quietly. The two beside him said nothing for a moment. Then, one at a time, they nodded. Che. The meeting ended at 11:15. The board filed out in the particular silence of men who had come in expecting one outcome and were leaving with another and needed time to incorporate the difference. Kong stood at the door and watched them go with his closed-door face. When the last one left, he looked at Seojun, and the look between them was brief and complete, and said everything two people who had worked together for 15 years could say without speaking. Then Kong left too. And it was just the two of them in the boardroom with the documents spread across the table and the October light flat through the windows and the city carrying on outside in its usual indifferent way. Seojun stood at the end of the table and looked at her. "You didn't have to be here," he said. "I know." "You could have?" "I know," she said again. "I was here." He held her gaze. Something in his expression, the aftermath of it, the particular exhaustion of a person who has held a line for a very long time and is now standing on the other side of the holding. "It's not over," he said. "The bail review, the regulatory process. Volkov won't accept the port situation quietly." "I know it's not over. It's going to be months, longer." He looked at her steadily. "The organization is going to be under pressure the entire time. My name is going to be in newspapers. People who don't like me are going to be very loud about not liking me, and that noise is going to touch everyone near me." He paused. "Including you." She crossed her arms. "Are you listing reasons for me to leave?" "I'm listing facts. The facts include that you just held your board, countered a manufactured prosecution, and took apart a 6-week destabilization campaign while on federal bail." She looked at him. "That's also a fact." He was quiet. "You're not going to get rid of me with a list," she said. Something happened in his face. The exhaustion was still there, but underneath it, underneath everything, the thing she'd seen in the federal visiting room, unguarded, the wall so far down now she wasn't sure he was bothering to rebuild it. "I owe you eggs," he said. She felt something move in her chest. "Yeah," she said, "you do." He came around the end of the table, stopped in front of her, close enough that she could see the lines at the corners of his eyes, the sleeplessness of the last 24 hours, the months of the last 4 years, the weight of a life conducted under permanent pressure. Up close, without the performance of the boardroom, he looked like what he was, a man who was tired of surviving and had only recently started to understand the difference between surviving and living. He lifted one hand and touched her face, careful, like someone who had learned to use his hands for everything except this, and was relearning the vocabulary of it. "I don't know how to do this," he said. Quiet. "I know," she said. "Neither do I. I'm going to make mistakes. Probably. I'm going to default to control when I'm scared. I'm going to..." "Seojun." She put her hand over his. "I'm standing here. I'm not asking for a contract." He looked at her, the crack in the wall, the whole wall down. He kissed her. It was not a movie kiss, not polished or perfectly timed or free of the awkward geography of two people who had been circling each other for weeks and were finally, imprecisely, landing. It was careful and a little rough at the edges, and it tasted like the particular desperation of something that had been held at a distance for too long and had finally been allowed to arrive. She held on to his jacket and he held on to her, and the boardroom with its documents and its cold October light was outside both of them for just that moment. 8. Yuna left New York 4 days later. Zoe found out from Kang, who told her in the matter-of-fact way he told her everything. A brief factual statement followed by silence. Yuna and her father had returned to their primary base of operations in Seoul. The Park Alliance proposal had been formally withdrawn. The Organized Crime Division's review of the intelligence submission had been quietly but unmistakably communicated to the Park family's legal representatives as problematic. She didn't ask for more detail than that. She thought about the woman at the table on 68th Street. The architectural beauty, the envelope, the 9 years of knowing someone and wanting them, and turning it all into strategy because strategy was the only language that felt safe. She thought about, I've been waiting 9 years for him to want something for himself. She thought about that for a long time. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt something more complicated than that, and she let it be complicated because that was closer to the truth of it. Volkov was harder. He didn't accept the port situation quietly, as predicted. Over the following 9 weeks, there were 2 incidents that Kang described to her as physical exchanges in language so stripped of detail that she knew better than to push for more. She saw the bruise on Seojun's jaw one evening in November, and touched it with 2 fingers and felt him stay very still under her hand, and neither of them spoke about it. The regulatory process moved at the pace regulatory processes moved, which was not fast, which required patience from a man who had spent his adult life operating in a world where patience meant exposure and exposure meant weakness. He was learning a different kind of patience. She watched it. It cost him. She cost him things too. The Harrington fired her. Not with an explanation, just a scheduling change that eliminated her shifts until there were no shifts left, which she understood to be the establishment quietly deciding it didn't want the association. She wasn't surprised. She was briefly furious, standing in her kitchen with the termination letter in her hand, feeling the old fear flex its familiar muscle. The electricity bill fear. The clearance produce fear. Seojun was in her kitchen when she opened it. He watched her read it and said nothing and waited. I need to find another job, she said. Okay. Don't offer me money. I wasn't going to. She looked at him. He was leaning against the counter in the gray sweater she'd first seen him in on the subway. She'd discovered it was the one he wore when he wasn't performing anything, when he was just a person in a kitchen. And his expression was the one she'd learned to read as I am watching, and I am here, and I will not do the thing you're braced for me to do. She put the letter down. I'm going to need a few days to be angry about this. Take them, he said, and then I'll figure it out. I know you will. She looked at him across the kitchen. The ordinary, unremarkable kitchen in the Flatbush apartment with the mildew smell and the window that didn't seal and the orchid vases, new ones now, small ones she'd bought herself because she'd eventually accepted that she'd wanted them all along, and pretending otherwise was just extra work. Thank you, she said, for not fixing it. He looked at her. Thank you, he said, for not needing me to. The charges were substantially dropped in December. Not all of them. 2 minor counts remained, subject to ongoing review, the kind of legal machinery that grinds slowly and generates paperwork and eventually resolves. But the core of the prosecution collapsed under the weight of what the Organized Crime Division's review uncovered. There was no announcement, no press conference. The news appeared in 2 small paragraphs in a legal trade publication and nowhere else, because that was the nature of it. Big in the world it happened in, and invisible to everyone outside. Seojun texted her. Done. She was at a coffee shop on Flatbush, filling out an application for a copywriting position at a small magazine that paid badly and interested her enormously. She looked at his text, typed back, done how, the charges, most of them. She sat with that for a moment. The coffee shop around her, the ordinary afternoon of it, People working on laptops and arguing about podcasts and living the insular New York life of people who had enough distance from the hard version that they could be loud about their opinions of things. "Come over tonight," she wrote. "I'll make dinner." A pause. "You cook?" "Badly," she wrote. "But I own a pan now, a real one." "I'll bring eggs," he wrote. She set the phone down. She looked at the application. She picked up her pen. The Volkov situation resolved in January, and not cleanly. She was never told all of it. She accepted this. There were things that happened in the world Seojun was still operating in that she was not part of and was not going to be part of. And she'd had to make peace with the specific discomfort of knowing something was happening without knowing the shape of it. It was not comfortable peace. It was the peace of a person who had decided that trust was a decision made in the absence of certainty and who had made it anyway. What she knew was that Dmitry Volkov withdrew from the port operations, that the regulatory forfeiture went through, that the bid Seojun had prepared was accepted, that Kang came to her apartment one evening in the second week of January, looking, for the first time in her experience, like a man who had come through something, and sat at her kitchen table and drank the tea she put in front of him without being asked, and said, "It's done." She looked at him. "Is he okay?" "He's okay," Kang said. Something crossed his face. Not quite a smile, but in the territory of one. "He'll be here in an hour." "Are you staying for dinner?" He looked at her with the closed-door face that was, she'd learned, his version of warmth. "Yes," he said. She made dinner for 3 in the Flatbush apartment, badly, as promised, but with the real pan and the good groceries and Destiny washing dishes in the background singing something under her breath. Seojun arrived at 7 and came into the kitchen and looked at the 3 plates on the table and the ordinary chaos of it and stood in the doorway for a moment with an expression she'd come to recognize. The expression of a man who had spent a long time not believing this kind of thing was available to him and was still, sometimes, surprised to find it real. She handed him a dish towel. "Make yourself useful." He took it. He dried the dishes Destiny handed him. He was bad at it, too precise, in the way of someone who had never dried dishes and was applying entirely too much focus to the task. And she watched him from across the kitchen and felt something move in her chest that she was long past pretending wasn't what it was. Bam! It took years. That part she understood going in, and understanding it in theory was different from living it in practice. The slowness of it. The genuine grinding work of 2 people who had both been damaged in particular ways trying to build something that didn't replicate the damage. They fought. More than once she put on her coat and walked out and stood on the street in the cold, thinking about how much easier it would be to go back to the invisible life, the cleared-away small life where nothing cost this much. Twice she made it to the subway before she stopped. She always came back. So did he. He defaulted to control when he was scared, as predicted. He made decisions without her when he thought the decisions were his to make, which was often and maddening. He had a specific silence, 3 to 4 days of it, when something happened in his world that he was processing alone. And she learned to read the silence correctly and stop trying to break it and be there when it ended. She went back to school. Not because he suggested it, he didn't, was careful not to, understood the difference between offering resources and making decisions for her about her own life. Because she'd been thinking about it since long before him, since the bruised apples in the invisible years, since the part of her that had been pressed down by necessity had started wondering what it wanted. She studied writing. She was good at it, which surprised nobody who had been paying attention. She wrote about the city, about the invisible people in it, the ones carrying trays, riding late trains, eating clearance produce, and building careful, small lives on the edges of the enormous thing. She wrote about them the way they actually were. Not saints, not victims, not characters in someone else's story. Just people with full, complicated, unglamorous inner lives conducting the hard daily business of survival. The first piece she published was in the small magazine she'd applied to the day the charges dropped. They paid her $200, and she kept the check for 3 weeks before depositing it because she wanted to look at it. She showed it to Seojun. He read it at the kitchen table. Her kitchen table. He was at her apartment more often than his now, which had happened gradually and been acknowledged even more gradually. And when he finished, he set it down and looked at it for a moment, and then looked at her. "This is really good," he said. I know, she said. She sat down across from him. What part surprised you most? He looked at the piece. The part about the subway, he said. The thing you said about how being invisible is something you practice until you stop knowing the difference between protection and disappearing. He looked up. I didn't know you saw it that way at the time. I didn't know I was going to write it until I did. He nodded, looked at the table, looked back at her with the expression she'd come to know as his version of saying something that cost him. I used to think, he said slowly, that what my father built was the thing I owed loyalty to, the structure, the survival of it. He turned the check over in his hands. I've been thinking lately that what he was actually trying to build, underneath all of it, in the only way he knew how, was something that would still be standing when he couldn't be. She was quiet. I don't think he knew another way to do it, Seojun said. The informant arrangement, the protection guarantee, the alliance he tried to structure with the parks. A pause. I think he was terrified. And terrified men build walls because they don't know how to build anything else. She thought about her mother, about the walls her mother had built, about the way you could spend a whole childhood inside someone else's fear and come out the other side, not sure which fears were yours. Yeah, she said. I know something about that. He looked at her. I know you do. They sat in the kitchen with the evening coming on outside, the city doing its usual thing, and the particular quiet of two people who have stopped needing to fill silence because silence between them had become a kind of communication. The network, she said. Where are you on it? He'd been working on the transition for 8 months, the slow, legally intensive, structurally complex process of converting criminal operations into legitimate ones. It was not glamorous. It generated enormous amounts of paperwork and required the kind of patience that felt, some days, like a full-time act of will. Some of the people who had worked for him left. Some stayed. Kong stayed, which Seojun had told her once, quietly, was the thing that had made the most difference on the days it felt impossible. 2 more fronts by Q2, he said. The security firm is fully legitimate now. The investment arm is clean. The remaining pieces... A pause. 2 years maybe, if nothing destabilizes the process. Things will destabilize it. Yes. He looked at her. But the direction is set now. That's the part that can't be taken back. He paused. My father spent 30 years building something to last. I think I'm spending mine building something to end, cleanly, on my own terms. She held that for a moment, the weight of it, what it cost a man like him to dismantle the thing he'd spent his adult life maintaining, the thing he'd been told was his inheritance and his identity and the measure of his worth. That's harder than building it, she said. Much harder, he said. Are you okay? A pause, the real kind. The kind where he actually checked before answering. Getting there, he said. Yes. 3 years after an apple rolled across the floor of the R train, Zoe stood in the same subway station at nearly midnight. She'd been at a reading, a small event in a bookstore in Park Slope, where she'd read 2 pieces to an audience of about 40 people, mostly strangers, and one woman in the 3rd row had cried at the end and afterward pressed her hand and said, I didn't know anyone else felt like that. And that was the whole point of it. That was all of it. That was the thing Zoe had been trying to put into words since the first clearance produce night and couldn't until she'd had enough distance from it to see its shape. She was tired, in a good way. The kind of tired that comes from using yourself fully rather than the grinding exhaustion of survival. On the platform, a young woman in scrubs was struggling with a canvas bag that had broken its strap. Not cut, like Zoe's. Snapped, the hardware failure of something pushed past its limit. Things were spilling out. An apple rolled across the platform and fetched up against the yellow safety line. Zoe picked it up. The woman looked up. Young, early 20s, dark circles, the specific blankness of someone who had mastered not being seen. Here, Zoe said, and handed the apple back. The woman took it, looked at Zoe with the slightly guarded expression of someone receiving unexpected kindness in a subway station at midnight, and not sure what it was going to cost her. Long shift? Zoe said. 16 hours, the woman said. Flat, automatic. Zoe looked at her. She saw herself, not as a mirror image, not as a narrative device, but as a specific young woman who was tired in a way that had started to feel permanent and was trying to become invisible in a city that made invisibility the easiest thing to be. "It gets better," she said. "Not easy. Better." The woman looked at her for a moment longer, nodded slightly, the way people nod when they don't quite believe something but can feel the intention behind it and want to honor it. The train came. They got on separately, parted by the crowd into different cars, and that was all it was. That was enough. Seojun was in the kitchen when she got home. The Carroll Gardens brownstone. They'd been here 8 months now, a decision reached so incrementally that neither of them could have named the exact moment it became obvious. The lease on her Flatbush apartment had ended in March. He'd said, quietly, that the brownstone had been empty long enough. She'd said she wasn't going to live somewhere that felt like a safe house. He'd said that what it felt like was up to her. She'd moved in April, and the first thing she'd done was put orchids on the windowsill, and the second thing she'd done was put her books on the shelves, and the third thing she'd done was sit at the old kitchen table and feel, with a completeness that surprised her, that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. He was cooking, something that smelled like the Korean stew he made on cold nights, the recipe from a woman in his childhood, someone who had been kind to him before kindness started feeling dangerous. He was in the gray sweater, sleeves pushed up, reading something on a legal document flat on the counter and stirring the pot without looking, the tattoos on his forearms, the broken-heeled knuckles, the jaw that had finally learned to unclench in this specific room. He looked up when she came in. "How was it?" he said. "Someone cried," she said. "Good crying or bad crying?" "Good." She put her bag down, took off her coat, came and stood beside him at the counter and looked at the document he was reading. Transition paperwork, legal language she'd gotten better at parsing, the machinery of dismantling something large and dangerous and building something clean in its place. "How's this one?" "Almost done," he said. "2 more signatures." She leaned against the counter. He put the document aside. They stood in the kitchen with the stew going and the brownstone quiet around them and the city outside doing its last hour before midnight business. "I saw a girl on the subway tonight," she said. "She dropped an apple." He looked at her. Something moved in his face. Recognition, and underneath it the specific warmth of a person who has learned to let things land instead of deflecting them. "Did you pick it up?" he said. "Yes." He turned back to the stove, adjusted the heat. The small, deliberate actions of a man who had spent a long time learning that ordinary things, a meal, an evening, a kitchen with someone in it, were not less significant than the large things, were, in fact, the entire point. "Good," he said. She looked at him. The gray sweater, the documents, the man who had come from a subway platform and a dead father's secrets and a burning empire and had arrived here, in this kitchen, cooking and reading legal papers and existing in the ordinary world with the particular gratitude of someone who had fought very hard to get to ordinary. She thought about everything it had cost. The camera in her apartment, the federal visiting room, the photograph of herself on the train, Yuna's face going still, the bruise on Seojun's jaw she'd touched and never spoken about, the things that happened in the world he'd come from that she would never fully know. She thought about the check for $200 she'd kept for 3 weeks before depositing. She thought about the woman in the third row who cried. She thought about it gets better and meant it. "I'm hungry," she said. 10 minutes, he said. She got plates from the cabinet, the good ones, the ones they'd bought together from a shop in Red Hook, because he'd had no plates of his own that he'd chosen himself, and she'd said this was unacceptable, and they'd spent an afternoon arguing mildly about plates and come home with 6 that neither of them had compromised on because they both actually liked them. She set the table. He brought the stew. They sat down across from each other at the old table in the dead man's kitchen that had become their kitchen. And outside the city moved through the last hour of the night, and inside the brownstone there was food and light, and the particular silence of 2 people who had survived the same storm separately and found each other on the other side of it. She thought about what she'd write tomorrow, about the subway girl and the apple, about the distance between invisible and seen and all the choices, small and enormous, that lived in that distance. She picked up her spoon. Seojun was watching her with the expression she'd stopped being surprised by, the unguarded one, The one that had been behind the wall since the first night on the train, and that lived now, most evenings, on the surface of his face without apology. "What?" she said. "Nothing," he said. "Quiet. Just this." She held it. Let it be what it was. They ate. Outside, the R train moved through the dark under the city, carrying its cargo of tired, invisible people toward home. And the city ground forward through the night the way it always had. Enormous, indifferent, beautiful in its total lack of concern for any single person moving through it. And in a kitchen in Carroll Gardens, two people who had chosen each other over survival sat across a table and ate a meal and rested, for the first time, without waiting for the next hard thing. It came, of course. It always did. But not tonight. Tonight there was just the stew and the light and the sound of the city outside, and the knowledge, quiet, permanent, earned through everything that had cost them, that they knew how to find their way back to this table. From whatever came next, from whatever broke, from wherever the hard road led, they knew the way back. That was enough. That was everything.